Harrison Sterling blew on the last spoonful of premium Patroin caviar to cool it down before offering it to Chloe Davis. Chloe pouted, turning her face away. "Harrison, I really can't eat anymore. The baby is full too." Harrison reached out and gently rubbed her slightly swollen belly. His voice so tender he sounded like a completely different person. "Be a good girl, Chloe. For our son. Just one more bite. Just one." Only then did Chloe stick out her lower lip, swallow the spoonful of caviar, and lean comfortably against Harrison's chest. "Harrison, you've been with me for 3 hours today. If you go back late, won't your wife be upset?" Harrison's expression darkened. "What right does she have to be upset? The house, the cars, the bank accounts are all provided by me. If she dares to say a single word of complaint, I'll make sure she doesn't even have a place to sleep." The corners of Chloe's mouth twitched up into a smirk, but she quickly suppressed it, replacing it with a pitiful look. "Harrison, don't talk about your wife like that. It must be hard for her to stay home alone taking care of little Leo." Harrison sneered. "I haven't even settled the score with her for raising a kid that might not even be mine." He checked his Rolex and stood up. "Rest well, Chloe. I need to head back for a bit. I'll come see you tomorrow." Chloe nodded obediently and watched Harrison walk out the door. The moment the door clicked shut, the sweet, innocent act dropped completely. She pulled out her iPhone, opened a text thread with an unsaved number, and typed a quick message. He left. The person on the other end replied instantly. "Good." Harrison slid into the back of his limited edition Mercedes Maybach and massaged his temples. His driver, Marcus, glanced at him through the rearview mirror and asked cautiously, "Mr. Sterling, are we heading back to the Greenwich estate?" Harrison grunted in agreement. "Yeah, head back." Marcus nodded and put the car in drive. Harrison leaned against the leather seat, closing his eyes to rest, still calculating in his head which private clinic in Manhattan he should take Chloe to for her prenatal checkup tomorrow. He completely failed to notice that the hands Marcus used to grip the steering wheel were trembling slightly. The drive took over an hour before they finally reached the luxury-gated community in Greenwich, Connecticut. Harrison got out and walked along the cobblestone path in the front yard. He took out his key to open the front door. He inserted the key and turned it twice, but the heavy oak door didn't budge. He frowned, turned it hard a few more times, but it still wouldn't open. Harrison cursed under his breath, wondering what the hell was going on. He banged on the door twice and yelled for Eleanor to open it. No one answered. He yelled again, "Leo, open the door for Dad!" Still nothing. Harrison's temper flared. He pulled out his phone and dialed Eleanor's number. A cold, automated voice came through the receiver, stating the number he dialed was out of service. Not believing it, he dialed his 4-year-old son, Leo's smartwatch. It was also powered off. His face flushed purple with rage. Just as he was about to smash his fist into the door, his neighbor, Mrs. Harrington, walked by holding a designer grocery tote. She looked at him with a very strange expression. "Mr. Sterling, why are you still here?" Mrs. Harrington asked. Harrison turned to look at her. "What do you mean, why am I still here? This is my house." Mrs. Harrington looked stunned. "Did your family not move out? A couple of days ago, I saw a real estate agent showing people around. They said the owner had listed the property for sale and the price was an absolute steal." Harrison's mind reeled. What sale? Who sold it? Mrs. Harrington was startled by his aggressive expression. "Your wife, of course, Eleanor. I saw her sign the brokerage agreement with my own eyes." The hand Harrison used to hold his phone began to shake. "When did this happen?" Mrs. Harrington thought for a moment. "About 3 days ago. That day she was holding your little boy and dragging 2 massive luxury suitcases. I was being nosy and asked her about it. She told me they were going on a cross-country vacation." Harrison stood frozen in place. He felt as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. Noticing how pale he looked, Mrs. Harrington didn't say anything else and quickly walked away. Harrison stood in front of the door he could no longer open. The bright afternoon sun was beating down on him, but his entire body felt freezing cold. He dialed another number, calling his executive assistant, Thomas Carter. It rang 5 or 6 times before Thomas finally picked up. Harrison immediately barked, "Find out where Eleanor Sterling is right now." There was a silence lasting several seconds on Thomas's end. Harrison roared, "Speak!" Thomas's voice sounded like he had been crying. "Mr. Sterling, I was just about to report to you. Your wife, 3 days ago, she authorized an agent to sell your Greenwich mansion. The final sale price was $45 million, an all-cash offer." Harrison's eyes widened in shock. "Bullshit! The property title is in my safe. How could she sell it?" Thomas took a sharp breath. "Mr. Sterling, did you forget? Back then, to avoid property taxes, that mansion was registered entirely under your wife's maiden name." The veins in Harrison's temples throbbed violently. "What about the child? Where is Leo?" Thomas's voice grew quieter. "Your wife took the boy. 3 days ago, they boarded a private flight out of Teterboro. Their destination was Aspen, Colorado." Harrison almost dropped his phone. "Aspen? Who bought her the tickets? All her credit cards were frozen. Who swiped a card for her?" Thomas was practically whispering now. "Mr. Sterling, your wife didn't use your cards. She used her own account. The pre-post shares she held in that Silicon Valley tech startup were entirely cashed out 3 days ago. Right now, the liquid assets in her bank account are more than what you have in yours." Harrison's vision went black. He had to lean against the door frame to stay standing. How is that possible? Where did she get pre-IPO shares? "I looked into that company. She had absolutely nothing. Mr. Sterling, the major shareholder of that company, was always your wife's mother. Before her mother passed away, she left a trust. All the equity automatically transferred to your wife on her 30th birthday. 3 days ago was exactly your wife's 30th birthday." Harrison felt as if the bones had been ripped from his body. He slid down the door frame and collapsed onto the porch. He remembered now. 3 days ago, he was accompanying Chloe for her 4D ultrasound. His phone had rung 7 or 8 times, all calls from Eleanor. He found it annoying and simply turned his phone off. So that was what she was doing at that exact moment. Harrison opened his mouth, his voice as raspy as sandpaper. "What about my MX Centurion card? Where is the black card with no spending limit?" Thomas's voice was completely drained of energy. "Your wife used your Centurion card at the Cartier boutique on 5th Avenue 3 days ago. She bought a custom diamond watch. She charged $5 million. When the bank called to verify the transaction, your phone was turned off. They processed it as a force post transaction. Mr. Sterling, the available balance in your primary account right now is less than $100,000. Harrison sprang to his feet, raising his hand to smash his phone, but midair he stopped. He saw a man approaching. It was Mr. Jenkins, the property manager of the Greenwich estate. Mr. Jenkins walked over holding a pristine white envelope, a professional smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Sterling, it's good to run into you. The new owner of this mansion completed the title transfer this afternoon. They authorized me to notify you to please clear out your personal belongings from the garage within 2 hours. The new owner stated they are taking back the rights to those 2 parking spaces." Harrison stared at him intensely. "What new owner?" Mr. Jenkins handed over the envelope. "It's your wife, Eleanor Sterling. 3 days ago, she sold the house to an LLC that she wholly owns. The transaction was finalized this afternoon. Mr. Sterling, the property rights to this mansion have absolutely nothing to do with you anymore." Harrison took the envelope. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely open it. Inside was a copy of the brand new property title. The owner column listed the name of a corporation. The managing member column clearly displayed the name Eleanor Sterling. Harrison stared at that name. His mind endlessly flashed back to the face Eleanor would greet him with every time he came home over the past 3 years. Submissive, enduring, asking him if he was hungry, if he wanted to eat. He thought that woman couldn't survive without him. He thought all her submissiveness was because she was too afraid to leave. He thought. Harrison suddenly burst into laughter. As he laughed, the sound turned into a hoarse sob. He slumped down in front of the home he could never enter again. His phone dinged. It was an iMessage audio note from Chloe. Her sweet, delicate voice asked, "Harrison, honey, I want to eat those artisanal croissants from that French bakery in Soho tomorrow morning. Could you pick some up for me on your way, please?" Harrison stared at that audio message. His thumb hovered over the screen for a very long time, unable to press down. The security camera above his head rotated slightly, pointing directly at his pathetic breakdown. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away at the Aspen-Pitkin County Airport in Colorado, a woman wearing a camel-colored trench coat led a 4-year-old boy out of the private aviation terminal. The little boy looked up and asked, "Mommy, are we never going back there again?" The woman crouched down, adjusted his scarf, and smiled. "We will go back, of course we will. Once Mommy finishes dealing with the business in New York, we'll go back on our own terms." She stood up, pulled out her phone, and looked at the notification on her screen showing the $45 million house payment and the $5 million watch transaction. A slow smile curled the corners of her mouth. Eleanor slipped the phone into her designer handbag, took Leo's hand, and strode confidently into the crisp, autumn sunlight of Aspen. Over 2,000 meters away, Harrison was still collapsed in front of the mansion that no longer belonged to him. The sky above was gloomy and suffocating. Inside the envelope next to him, besides the property deed copy, there was a thin sheet of paper. The heading on that paper read, "Divorce Settlement Agreement." At the bottom, Eleanor's signature was clean and sharp, the strokes carrying a sense of fierce satisfaction. The date on the document was 3 days ago, the exact afternoon he had turned off his phone to accompany Chloe for her ultrasound. Harrison clenched that agreement in his hand, the sharp edges of the paper digging painfully into his palm. He finally understood one thing. That woman had never been waiting for him to come home for dinner. What she was waiting for was the moment he completely let his guard down. Chapter 2. 3 years of ice. Harrison sat on the ground for 2 full hours. Mr. Jenkins, the property manager, came over to rush him twice, stating that the new owner's cleaning crew was about to enter for a deep clean and asking him to leave immediately. When Harrison stood up, his joints cracked loudly. His legs were so numb he could barely stand. He folded the divorce agreement, shoved it into his pocket, took one last look at the mansion he had lived in for 3 years, and turned toward the garage. His Maybach was still parked there. The new owner hadn't touched his car, but the red Porsche 911 that used to be parked next to it was gone. That was Eleanor's car. Harrison got into his own car. He sat in the driver's seat staring blankly for a long time. He suddenly remembered that the red Porsche was bought the year Eleanor married him. She paid the down payment herself. At the time, he thought it was ridiculous. He mocked her, saying a married woman paying for her own car was an embarrassment. Eleanor had just smiled and said, "I like having my own independence." Back then, he thought the woman was just being weird. Thinking about the true meaning behind those words now sent a violent chill down Harrison's spine. He drove away from the Greenwich estate, having no idea where to go. He didn't want to see Chloe right now. His mind was too chaotic to go to the corporate office. Finally, he drove to the Sterling family's historic estate on Long Island. His father, Richard Sterling, and his mother, Margaret Sterling, lived there. When Harrison walked in, Margaret was arranging flowers. Seeing him return at this hour surprised her. "Why are you back so early today? Where are Eleanor and Leo?" Harrison took off his suit jacket, threw it on the sofa, and said, "They're gone." Margaret paused, holding the floral scissors. "What do you mean they're gone?" Harrison sank into the couch, tilting his head back to look at the ceiling. Eleanor sold the mansion, took Leo across the country, and left a divorce agreement for me to sign. Margaret set the scissors down, walked over, and sat opposite him. "Harrison, how many times has your mother told you? Eleanor is not someone you can afford to mess with. You know exactly what kind of status her late mother held in Manhattan's high society. Even though her mother passed away, the Vance family's connections are still firmly in place. You have treated her with cold indifference all these years. Did you really think she wouldn't remember every single bit of it?" Harrison sat up abruptly. "Mom, what do you mean? Did you know she was going to leave?" Margaret sighed. "I didn't know she would go this far, but I knew she would leave sooner or later. Did you think she was blind to you keeping that Chloe girl on the side? Did you think she didn't notice that you haven't slept in the same bed as her for 3 years? When she was pregnant with Leo, you never accompanied her to a single doctor's appointment. When she gave birth, you were in another state celebrating Chloe's birthday. She never said a word out loud, but she recorded every single grievance in her heart." Harrison's face turned completely pale. Of course, he remembered those things. He just always thought they didn't matter. Eleanor had a mild temper and never raised her voice. He thought she could endure anything. He thought she would endure it for the rest of her life. Margaret looked at her son's expression and shook her head. "Who are you putting on this miserable act for? Go upstairs and look in the drawers of your old home office. Everything she left for you before she left is in there. I saw them a few days ago when I went over to your place to help pack some old items. If you had bothered to read even one page, you wouldn't have had to wait until today to know what was going on in her head." Harrison stood up violently and sprinted up the stairs. His old office was the room at the end of the second-floor hallway. He pushed the door open. The desk and cabinets were spotlessly clean, all files and documents stacked in perfect order. He pulled open the third drawer on the left. Inside sat 3 leather-bound journals, perfectly aligned. Harrison picked up the top journal and opened it. The first page had a date from the 2nd month of their marriage. There was only one line. "He didn't come home again tonight. I ate dinner alone. My stomach hurts a little. I don't know if it's from the injection I got at the clinic yesterday. The doctor said I need to stay in bed for 3 days. I didn't tell him. Even if I did, he wouldn't care." Harrison flipped forward a few pages. Page 3. Prenatal checkup today. The doctor asked where my family was. I said my husband was on a business trip. They drew 5 vials of blood from me alone. On the way back, I got motion sickness and threw up in the Uber. The driver charged me a $50 cleaning fee. I told him he reimbursed me for it. He didn't even ask why I needed a cleaning fee. Page 5. Leo learned how to say dad. I recorded a video and sent it to him. He replied with one word, "Okay." I stared at that okay for half an hour, then deleted the video. Page 15. Late at night, my fever spiked to 102 degrees. I called him. When he answered, I heard a woman laughing in the background. He said he was at a networking event and told me to call the family doctor. I hung up and took Tylenol by myself. When I woke up in the morning, the fever was gone, and so was my heart. Page 23. He found out I looked through his phone. He said, "Eleanor, you better remember your place. I have never shortchanged you on the house, the cars, or the money. Don't push your luck." I didn't say anything. I just wondered what he meant by not shortchanging me. Did he mean the front seat of his car that no one is ever allowed to sit in? Or did he mean his slippers by the door that are never worn? Page 40. He came home drunk today. He hugged me and called out the name Chloe. I said, "You have the wrong person." He raised his hand and slapped my face, saying, "Even you dare to talk back to me?" The slap wasn't hard, but I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I took out that unlimited credit card he placed under my pillow. I didn't swipe it. I just looked at it for an entire night. Harrison flipped to the very last page. The handwriting was much messier than the rest, written in a hurry. Last page. "Today is my son's 4th birthday," he called home. I thought he was calling to wish Leo a happy birthday. Instead, he said, "Chloe is pregnant and told me to be smart and move out on my own." I just said, "Okay." He probably thought I was pretending to be calm. He didn't know that I have truly made up my mind. On my 30th birthday, I plan to take Leo and leave. I will take the houses, the cars, and the money myself. He won't need to kick me out. The date was 2 months ago. When Harrison closed the journal, his hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor of the office. his back pressed against the bookcase. The words from those journals flashed repeatedly through his mind, drawing 5 vials of blood alone, throwing up in the Uber. A 102-degree fever late at night, hugging her and calling out, "Chloe, that slap." He raised his hand and touched his own face. When he slapped her that night, he was so drunk he barely remembered it. But he remembered waking up the next morning and seeing that the side of Eleanor's face was slightly red. He had asked her what happened. She said she slept on it funny, and he had actually believed her. Harrison looked down at the journal in his hand. There was a small brown stain on the cover, looking exactly like a dried teardrop. He hugged the journal to his chest, resting his forehead on his knees, his shoulders shaking violently. Downstairs, Margaret heard a muffled thud from the second floor, like a heavy object hitting the floorboards. She didn't go up. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Eleanor. "I know about you leaving. Take care." 10 minutes later, the other side replied, "Thank you, Mom. Please take care of yourself." Margaret stared at that word. Mom, for 3 years, Eleanor had always called her that with absolute sincerity. She had watched her son commit all these sins over the years, knowing she couldn't stop him. The only thing she could do was quietly sneak all of Leo's childhood photos out of the albums and slip them into the hidden compartment of Eleanor's suitcase on the day she left. She didn't say a word at the time. Eleanor had hugged her and said, "Thank you." Margaret still remembered the warmth of that hug. Upstairs, the sound of Harrison's intermittent sobbing drifted down. Margaret closed her eyes and placed her phone face down on the table. "Serves him right." Those words popped into her mind. Then she sighed. He was her son after all. But she couldn't bring herself to say a single word of comfort. In the office, Harrison stacked the 3 journals together. His fingers gripped the edges of the covers so tightly his knuckles turned white. His phone rang. It was another audio message from Chloe. She said, "Harrison, honey, my stomach feels a little uncomfortable. Can you come over and keep me company?" Harrison stared at the message. The audio played through the speaker, the sweet, delicate female voice echoing in the empty room. He suddenly remembered a line from the journal, a 102-degree fever. "Late at night, I called him. I heard a woman laughing in the background. He recognized that laugh now. It was Chloe." Harrison slammed his phone screen down onto the floor. He didn't reply and didn't answer. He reopened the journal to the last page and looked closely. Below that hurried handwriting, there was another line of very small text, so small he had missed it earlier. That small line read, "Harrison, I waited 3 years for you to turn back. On the day you finally look back, I will throw these 3 diaries right in your face, and then I will tell you." Leo's last name isn't Sterling at all. Guess whose son he really is? Harrison's eyes widened dramatically. He frantically flipped back to the previous pages, rereading every single word. The prenatal checkup records, the dates she went alone, the afternoon she said their son learned to call for dad, the afternoon he replied with a single, "Okay." Leo's small face flashed before his eyes, his features. Harrison had never truly looked at Leo's features. He always assumed the boy shared 2 or 3 traits with him, but trying desperately to remember now, he realized that the resemblance was just a lie his subconscious had fed him. Harrison sprang up. His phone fell to the floor, the screen shattering. He stared at that tiny line of text for 5 full minutes, his brain entirely blank. Not his son. That woman had brought a child who wasn't his into his home, living right under his nose for 4 years. He even paid child support on time every month, bought birthday gifts, and during the holidays, when his father forced them to take family portraits, he would stand off to the side looking incredibly annoyed. But he had looked at Leo's face in those photos a few times. He truly thought that was his own flesh and blood. Harrison slowly crouched down, picked up his shattered phone, and dialed Thomas's number. The call connected. Harrison's voice was sore. It sounded like he was recovering from a severe illness. "Thomas, help me look into something." "Tell me," Thomas said. Harrison took a deep breath. Investigate Leo's birth records, every hospital, every file. I want to know who his biological father is." Thomas fell silent for 3 seconds. "Mr. Sterling, are you sure you want me to investigate this? The results might not be good for you. I told you to investigate, so do it." Thomas sighed. "Mr. Sterling, there is something I didn't dare tell you before. Before your wife left, she sent me a text. She said, 'If there comes a day when you want to look into Leo's background, I should give this to you.' What is it? It's a scanned copy of a DNA paternity test. The date of the test is 7 days after Leo was born. The samples tested were yours and his. The conclusion states there is a 0% probability of paternity." The shattered phone finally slipped from Harrison's hand completely, smashing against the hardwood floor. The screen went completely dark. He slid down the bookcase and collapsed onto the ground, the overhead light blinding him until his vision flashed white. So she had kept everything. So she had planned everything from the start. So for 3 years, the woman who stood obediently at the door waiting for him to come home had been silently counting down the days. She wasn't waiting for him to come home. She was waiting for the day she would never need him to come home ever again. Chapter 3. Divorce Agreement. When Harrison woke up, it was already the next morning. He had been frozen awake. The AC in the office had shut off automatically at some point, and a window was left half open. The crisp autumn wind blew in, making his very bones ache. When he sat up, his back was so stiff, it felt like he had been beaten. His cell phone was completely shattered and unusable. He found the landline on the desk and dialed Thomas's number. Thomas picked up quickly. "Mr. Sterling, you finally called. There's a situation at the company." Harrison pressed his temples. "What situation?" "The board of directors sent out an emergency notice. There's an urgent meeting at AM today. All board members must attend, including your wife." Harrison's hand paused. "Eleanor, she's in Colorado. How can she attend?" Thomas's voice carried a subtle shift. She arranged a Zoom call. "Mr. Sterling, the meeting starts in 40 minutes. Are you coming?" Harrison stood up, stretching his stiff legs. "I'm heading there now." He drove for 40 minutes and arrived at the Manhattan headquarters of Sterling Enterprises. When the receptionist saw him, her expression was strange, looking as if she wanted to say something but held back. Harrison ignored her and went straight to the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the receptionist making a hushed phone call. He vaguely heard the words, "He's here." Harrison frowned. When he reached the top floor, the executive hallway was dead silent. The boardroom doors were closed. He pushed them open and walked in. 6 or 7 people were already seated, all of them senior board members of Sterling Enterprises. Usually, they were incredibly deferential to him. Today, not a single person greeted him when he walked in. Harrison walked to his usual seat and sat down. "What's the agenda for this meeting?" "I didn't receive any prior notice." Board member Mitchell, who sat next to the head of the table, cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, this meeting was called abruptly. We mainly have 2 things to inform you of." "Speak." Mr. Mitchell glanced at the others, then pressed a button on his iPad. The massive projector screen at the front of the room lit up, and a Zoom window popped open. In the video, Eleanor was sitting in a bright, modern office. The background was a floor-to-ceiling glass window showing distant mountains and the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies. She was wearing a gray turtleneck sweater, her hair pinned up elegantly, and wearing light makeup. She looked incredibly radiant. Sitting next to her was a middle-aged man in gold-rimmed glasses, a stack of documents spread out in front of him. Harrison stared at Eleanor on the screen for 3 seconds, suddenly feeling like he was looking at a complete stranger. He had looked at that face for 3 years. But the light in the eyes of the woman on this screen was something he had never seen in their home. Eleanor smiled at the camera. "I'm online. Good morning, board members." The directors enthusiastically greeted her back. Their eager attitudes made Harrison frown even deeper. "Miss Eleanor, everyone is here. Let's begin," Mr. Mitchell said. Harrison snapped his head toward Mr. Mitchell. What did you just call her?" Mr. Mitchell was slightly startled by his tone, but maintained his composure. "Mr. Sterling, it's like this. 3 days ago, Miss Eleanor officially acquired 37.5% of the shares in Sterling Enterprises, making her the largest single shareholder of this company. According to the corporate bylaws, the largest shareholder has the right to nominate executive directors and participate in daily operational decisions. So, we now collectively address her as our executive chairwoman." Harrison felt as if he had been nailed to his chair. 37.5%. My father founded this company. Those shares have always been in his control. How could Eleanor possibly get them? Mr. Mitchell cut him off. "Mr. Sterling, those shares came from a total equity transfer from your mother, Mrs. Margaret Turling. 3 days ago, Mrs. Sterling voluntarily transferred all her shares to Miss Eleanor at no cost. All the relevant paperwork has been finalized. You may review the legal documents at any time." An explosion went off in Harrison's brain. His mother. His mother gave her shares to Eleanor. He suddenly remembered Margaret's casual remark yesterday. "Go upstairs and look in the drawers of your old home office." She had said it so lightly, as if she already knew that even if he found out, it would be utterly useless. Harrison stared at Eleanor's calm face on the screen, all the blood in his body rushing to his head. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? You married into the Sterling family, took my mother's shares. What exactly are you trying to do?" Eleanor smiled. The smile was faint and completely different from any smile he remembered. "Harrison, your mother transferred them to me voluntarily. The paperwork is complete, notarized, and entirely legal. If you don't believe it, you can hire a lawyer. I called the board here today mainly for 2 reasons. First, as the largest shareholder, I officially propose convening an extraordinary general meeting to hold a board vote to restructure the C-White. Second," she paused, picked up the document next to her, and flipped a page. "Second, according to Article 14, Section 3 of our corporate bylaws, the majority shareholder has the right to propose the dismissal of the current CEO under circumstances of a breach of fiduciary duty. I believe that Mr. Harrison Sterling has demonstrated gross managerial negligence during his tenure and is engaged in multiple personal activities that have severely damaged the company's reputation. The specifics and supporting evidence have already been emailed to every board member. You may all review them now." Harrison shot up from his chair, slamming his palms on the table with a loud bang. "Eleanor, don't cross the line. I have worked at this company for 10 years. You think you can just fire me on a whim?" Eleanor ignored him and spoke to the other directors. "Please open the attachments in your emails." A chorus of email notification chimes rang out across the boardroom. The directors looked down at their phones for a moment. Visibly, their expressions became more and more colorful. After reading the first page, Mr. Mitchell looked up at Harrison. Harrison instantly read the meaning in his eyes. It was the look of looking at a piece of trash. Harrison took 3 quick strides over to Mr. Mitchell and snatched his phone. Right there on the screen was a screenshot. It was a photo of him and Chloe embracing in a luxury hotel lobby. The date indicated it was 3 months ago. Right below the photo was an expense report showing a charge from that exact hotel at that exact time billed to the company's client entertainment account. The amount was $40,000. Corporate funds spent on a luxury stay with his mistress disguised as a marketing department entertainment expense. Half the blood in Harrison's body went ice cold. He used to think this kind of stuff didn't matter. The company was his anyway. He spent his own money and expensed his own accounts. Who could say anything? But he forgot that now Eleanor was the one sitting in the controlling shareholder's seat. Eleanor's voice transmitted calmly through the speakers. "I also prepared 3 surveillance video clips. In the interest of time, I won't play them during the meeting. Any director interested can view them privately afterward. I mainly want to highlight one issue. During his tenure, Mr. Harrison Sterling utilized corporate resources to fund extreme personal luxury expenses. Preliminary estimates put the total amount at over $3 million. According to company bylaws, he is required to repay this amount in full. Harrison turned his head, glaring death at Eleanor on the screen. "You did all this just for this, just to get revenge on me." Eleanor looked at him, her expression entirely devoid of emotion. "Harrison, I'm not taking revenge on you. I'm simply exercising my rightful authority as the major shareholder. The money you squandered over the years is a portion of the equity your mother entrusted to me. Reclaiming it is perfectly justified. As for you personally," she looked down, flipped another page, and continued, "you caused the company's net profit to drop by 42% over 3 years. The turnover rate among core executives reached 60%. The brand's reputation has been repeatedly damaged due to your private life scandals. You ignored every written inquiry from the board. You skipped 7 quarterly review meetings. Harrison, I don't need to take revenge on you. I just need to let the facts speak for themselves." The boardroom was so quiet that only the hum of the central AC could be heard. Harrison stood there, sweat dripping down his temples. He suddenly realized something. Not a single director here today was speaking up for him. These people used to bow and scrape, calling him Mr. Sterling with utmost respect. But today, sitting there flipping through Eleanor's evidence, every single face clearly broadcasted the message: "You are finished." Harrison clenched his fists and yelled at the screen, "Even if everything you say is true, the shareholder meeting hasn't happened yet. I am still the CEO right now. Calling this meeting today is a massive overreach of your power." Eleanor gave a small laugh. "I didn't overreach. First, today is an emergency board meeting. I have the right to convene it. Second, regarding the proposal to dismiss you, I've already secured the written consent of over 2/3 of the board members present. Harrison, as of this moment, you are no longer the CEO." She held up a piece of paper to the camera. It was densely packed with 7 or 8 signatures. From a distance, Harrison saw Mr. Mitchell's signature, as well as Mr. Brooks and Mr. Reynolds. All of them were veterans who had followed him for years. Harrison whipped his head around to look at them. Mr. Mitchell averted his gaze. Mr. Brooks scrolled on his phone in silence. "Mr." Reynolds simply stood up, muttered that he was going out for a smoke, and brushed past Harrison's shoulder to exit the room. Harrison stood alone in a boardroom that was now half empty. Eleanor was still on the projector screen, watching him quietly like looking at a stranger. "When did you start planning this?" he asked. 3 years ago, she said. "Harrison, when I was pregnant with Leo, you were out of state celebrating someone else's birthday. On my way back from the hospital after my prenatal checkup, I figured something out. I didn't marry you to be a decorative vase. Since you didn't value me, I decided to take away the things you value most, piece by piece." Slowly, there was no rush. After saying that, she closed the file folder and gave the camera a faint smile. "I have other matters to attend to. Goodbye, board members." The video window minimized, Harrison stood completely alone in the massive boardroom. The harsh, pale, fluorescent lights glared down at him, pinning him to the spot, rendering him entirely unable to move. He hadn't brought his phone up with him, but there was an internal landline on the conference table. He walked over, picked it up, and dialed Thomas's extension. The moment the call connected, he barked, "I need you to find out exactly how many assets are under Eleanor's name right now. How much of the Sterling family's wealth does she actually control?" Thomas was silent for a moment. "Mr. Sterling, there is actually one more thing I haven't told you. Speak. Before your wife left, she made a deal with me. She traded my 3 years' salary plus a penthouse in Brooklyn in exchange for my total cooperation over the past 3 months. Mr. Sterling, she has been preparing for 3 months. All the evidence, all the documents, the contact information for everyone involved. She acquired all of it in advance. Everything I told you yesterday was scripted. She ordered me to tell you. The paternity test, the mansion sale, everything, Harrison roared. Including what else? Including the fact that the primary line for the cell phone you're using right now was reported lost by her the day before yesterday. Mr. Sterling, the phone you are holding has absolutely no cellular signal anymore. The information I just sent you was sent to a backup number she provided. Harrison looked down at his own shattered phone. There wasn't a single bar of service. He finally realized that every single channel he had to contact the outside world had been severed. The boardroom doors were pushed open from the outside. Two young women from the administrative department walked in, carrying cardboard boxes. One of them spoke cautiously. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Eleanor's office sent word for you to pack your personal belongings. This office is scheduled for a full renovation this afternoon." Standing in the hollow boardroom, the landline next to Harrison suddenly rang. He picked it up. An unfamiliar male voice spoke from the other end. "I am looking for Mr. Harrison Sterling. This is the New York State Supreme Court Family Division. A Miss Eleanor Sterling has filed an emergency injunction to freeze all financial accounts under your name, pending a divorce and corporate fraud investigation. We have received the relevant legal mandates. This serves as your official notification." Harrison slammed the phone down. Chapter 4. Prelude to the Counterattack. Harrison was escorted out of the Sterling Enterprises building by two security guards. His personal belongings were shoved into a single cardboard box. Inside was just a fountain pen he had used for 3 years, 2 boxes of business cards, and a picture frame. The photo was of him, Richard, and Margaret taken in the courtyard of the Long Island estate. In the picture, he was smiling casually. Margaret stood next to him and Richard sat in front. Back then, the old man hadn't yet suffered a stroke and was full of energy. He had kept this photo on his desk for 3 years, but had never truly looked at it. Now the security guard shoved the box into his arms and said, "Mr. Sterling, all your things are here. Please leave the lobby immediately. We have clients coming in." Harrison stood at the entrance of the building holding the box. Employees bustled past him, walking quickly to avoid him. Not a single person stopped to ask how he was. The same people who used to bow and scrape when they saw him were now hugging the walls, treating him like a plague. He stood in the cold wind for over 10 minutes before remembering his Maybach was still in the underground parking garage, but his car keys had gone missing in the chaos upstairs. Harrison patted all his pockets. Nothing. He found a lobby landline to call Thomas's extension. The call went through, but a female voice answered. "Thomas Carter has officially started his annual leave today. If you need anything, you can leave a message. I am Harrison Sterling. Tell him to pick up the phone." The other side was silent for 2 seconds. "Mr. Sterling. Thomas specifically instructed that if you call, he is unavailable." The line went dead. Harrison gripped the receiver and stood there for a long time before slowly placing it back on the hook. He had no choice but to hail a yellow cab back to the Long Island estate. The taxi driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror several times, looking like he wanted to ask something, but deciding against it. Harrison couldn't be bothered to care. He leaned against the window, his eyes closed, his mind as chaotic as a boiling pot of porridge. When he arrived at the estate, he walked through the door yelling, "Mom!" Margaret walked out of the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour. Seeing his pathetic state, she didn't look surprised at all. She simply said, "You're back. Have you eaten?" Harrison slammed the cardboard box onto the coffee table. "Why did you give her the shares?" Margaret wiped her hands. "Your mother has lived for 63 years. I've seen through the things I need to see through. If Chloe's baby is actually yours, I'll eat my own words and hand over the keys to this estate." Harrison froze. "What do you mean?" Margaret sneered. "Do you think I'm a senile old fool like your father? The Sterling family has kept its legacy tight for 3 generations. When your grandfather passed, he held my hand and told me to protect the Sterling assets at all costs. I had someone investigate Chloe. Check if her pregnancy timeline actually lines up with your dates. Did you seriously believe she was pregnant with your child? 9 out of 10 words that come out of her mouth are lies. Harrison's brain was buzzing. But what about the shares Eleanor has? I gave them to her voluntarily, Margaret said. After your father had his stroke, the entire company was dumped on your shoulders. You know exactly what you did with it. You lost 40% of our profits in 3 years. If you keep thrashing around, the Sterling family's entire legacy will be wiped out. Eleanor has the skills and the brains. Giving the shares to her means she can hold the company together. If I left them with you, you would just use them to fill that woman's bottomless pit of expenses. Harrison shot to his feet. Mom, she is my wife. You gave the Sterling family's assets to her, and she turned around and filed for divorce. The Sterling family has nothing left. Margaret stared at him for a few seconds, then suddenly let out a laugh. Harrison, even now, you still call her your wife. 3 years ago, when you left her alone at the hospital for her checkup, why didn't you call her your wife? When you let Chloe sit in the front seat of your car, why didn't you call her your wife? Over the holidays, when you wouldn't even come home and made Eleanor bring Leo to the estate to keep me company, you couldn't even be bothered to make a phone call. Why didn't you call her your wife then? Harrison was choked to silence by her words. Margaret untied her apron, threw it on the sofa, and sat down. Her tone suddenly became very calm. Son, let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. In the 3 years Eleanor has been married into this family, she has been genuinely good to me. During the 6 months your father was hospitalized after his stroke, you were out partying with Chloe. It was Eleanor who ran to the hospital every single day, cleaning up after him, handling the bedpans. She never complained once. Ask your own conscience. What have you ever done for her? Harrison opened his mouth, but not a single word came out. Margaret continued. She came to see me before she left. She told me she wanted the shares. She said she wanted to use the Sterling brand to build something real and asked if I agreed. I said I agreed. She promised she would not mistreat the Sterling family. Every cent of dividends the family is owed will be paid in full. She also told me one other thing. I originally didn't want to tell you. Margaret looked him dead in the eyes and said she said the child in Chloe's belly and Chloe herself were hired by her to keep you occupied. Harrison felt like he had been struck by lightning rooted to the spot. What? You heard me. Margaret Sedlow was arranged by Thomas the assistant right by your side. Thomas works for Eleanor. He planted this trap next to you 3 years ago. She waited for you to fall completely into it, and then she ripped it out by the roots, taking back everything you owned. Harrison slumped back onto the sofa, his face the color of ash. So for the past 3 years, all the sweet nothings, he whispered while holding Chloe. Every wire transfer he made to buy her houses, cars, and designer bags, every time he turned off his phone to accompany her for an appointment, all of it was under Eleanor's surveillance. Eleanor watched him walk step by step into that pit, taking her time to shovel more dirt around the edges. Then, when he finally hit rock bottom, she slowly climbed down and buried him alive. Harrison suddenly realized something. He violently whipped his head toward Margaret. Then, whose child is Leo? Margaret was silent for a long while. I had someone investigate Leo's biological father. Eleanor had the files entirely locked down. With the connections her mother's family holds, if she wants to hide something, no one can dig it up. But I can tell you one thing. When that boy calls me Grandma, he sounds a hell of a lot more genuine than when he calls you Dad. Harrison buried his face in his hands and bent over. His mother's words pierced too deep, because it was the truth. Every time Leo called him Dad, his voice was small and timid, as if he was terrified of him. Yet when he crouched down to tie the boy's shoes, the kid would look at him with bright, shining eyes and smile. No matter whose bloodline the boy belonged to, he had called Harrison Dad hundreds of times over the past 4 years. Yet Harrison had never attended a single parent-teacher conference. Once, Eleanor called him while he was out having dinner with Chloe. She said Leo was performing in a school play and asked if he wanted to come watch. He said he was too busy. Later, he saw a video Eleanor posted on Instagram. Leo was wearing a little lion costume dancing on stage. The audience was full of other children's parents. Next to the empty seat in Leo's row sat Eleanor alone. She held her phone up to record the video, and when it ended, she put the phone down and clapped for him. The sound of her applause echoed loudly in the cavernous auditorium. Harrison had scrolled past that post, liked it, and never looked back. He never knew that. Later that night, Eleanor took Leo out for his favorite ice cream. The boy took a bite and asked, "Mommy, why didn't Dad come?" "Because your dad is busy." "Then when will he not be busy?" "When he doesn't need to be busy anymore, he'll know to come." But now Harrison understood the true meaning of Eleanor's words. It wasn't about waiting for him to finish being busy. It was about waiting until he was finished so she could be gone. Harrison looked up at his mother, his eyes frighteningly red. "Mom, where is she right now? Give me her contact info." Margaret stood up and walked toward the kitchen. Without looking back, she said, "She blocked every single way you could contact her. She's not even using my number anymore. Before she left, she told me one thing. Once she stabilizes the situation out there, she'll return on her own. Whether you'll even be worthy to stand in front of her when that time comes depends on how you spend this time repairing the damage." "When will she be back?" Margaret stopped at the kitchen door, glanced back at him and said, "Take a guess." Then she walked into the kitchen and shut the door. Harrison sat alone in the sprawling, empty living room of the estate. Sunlight streamed through the French windows, hitting his body, but he felt freezing cold. He pulled out his shattered phone and lit up the screen. The audio message Chloe sent last night was still sitting there. "Harrison, honey, my stomach feels a little uncomfortable. Can you come over and keep me company?" He tapped it and listened to it once, then again. Then he dialed Chloe's number. It connected. Chloe answered using the same sweet, overly delicate tone. "Harrison, you finally called me back. I missed you so much. Why did you ignore me last night?" Harrison gripped the phone, his knuckles white. "Chloe, what is your relationship with Thomas Carter?" The other end of the line was dead silent for 5 full seconds. Then Chloe's voice changed. The sugary sweetness vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp tone. "Harrison, you finally figured it out. What's my relationship with Thomas? We live together. He's my boyfriend. We're getting our marriage license next month. He asked me to thank you. The year-end bonuses you wired him over the years were enough for us to put a down payment on a house." Harrison's vision went dark. Chloe continued, "Oh, right. One more thing. The baby in my belly has absolutely nothing to do with you. You never even touched me from the start. Over the past 3 years, every time you tried to sweet-talk me, I was sick of the smell of your cologne. Eleanor paid me to act out a script with you. I thought the money was good, so I took the gig." Harrison's voice shook uncontrollably. "You were lying to me from the very beginning." Chloe laughed brightly. "Obviously. Did you really think I liked a cold-blooded reptile like you? Let me tell you, Harrison. Eleanor prepared for this day for 3 years. From the very first night you stayed over at my place instead of going home, she was recording evidence. Every wire transfer, every hotel booking, every receipt for the gifts you bought me, she kept all of it. Get ready to trend on X." The call disconnected. When Harrison dialed back, the number was out of service. He sat gripping the phone for a full 10 minutes before suddenly jumping up, sprinting out of the estate and hailing a cab. He told the driver to floor it to Chloe's luxury apartment in the city. When he arrived, the apartment door was slightly ajar. Inside, it was completely empty. The clothes in the closet were gone. The expensive skincare products on the vanity had vanished. On the glass coffee table in the living room sat an envelope. On it was written, "For Harrison Sterling." Harrison ripped the envelope open. A cashier's check and a piece of paper fell out. The note read, "This check is the total exact sum of all the gifts and money you gave me over the past 3 years. $2 million. Eleanor told me to return it to you in full. She said she doesn't need your dirty money and told you to use it to buy yourself a nice coffin." Harrison crouched in the middle of the empty living room, crushing the check in his fist. Suddenly, his phone screen lit up. He looked down. It was a push notification for trending topics on X. Sterling CEO ousted. Billionaire love triangle. Harrison Sterling. Chloe leak tape. Next to the last hashtag was a bright red trending icon. Harrison clicked on it. The top video already had over 8 million views. The footage showed a man and woman tangled together in a hotel bed. The man's face was captured, crystal clear. It was him. The camera angle was brutal, aimed straight at the headboard, the quality so high you could see the fine lines around his eyes. The comment section below was scrolling at hyper speed. Harrison only had time to read the top comments. "So this is what a billionaire CEO looks like. Handsome, but absolute trash. Is that the mistress? The wife was pregnant and got kicked out of the company. Karma. Trash deserves to burn." Harrison hurled his phone at the ground, smashing it to pieces. He curled up, pulling his knees to his chest in the corner of Chloe's empty apartment. The crisp autumn wind howled through the cracks in the window, making him shiver violently. He was finished. He was completely finished. 2,000 miles away in Aspen, Eleanor closed the browser tab showing the Sterling Enterprises dismissal announcement. She picked up her coffee cup and took a sip. Sitting next to her, the man in the gold-rimmed glasses said, "Eleanor, did you see the trending topics back in New York?" Eleanor set down her cup. "The ones you uploaded?" The man smiled. "Of course. You prepared the footage perfectly. I stayed up all night editing them." Eleanor nodded. "Good work." She reached for her phone, opened X, and glanced at it. The 3 hashtags were still sitting at the top of the trending list, followed by tens of thousands of comments ripping Harrison to shreds. She locked the screen, placed the phone back on the table, and looked out at the snow-capped Rocky Mountains, letting out a soft exhale. Then she looked down at Leo, who was quietly drawing next to her. She asked, "How about we fly back home the day after tomorrow?" Leo looked up. "Back to New York to see Grandma?" Eleanor stroked his hair and smiled. "Yes, to see Grandma, and to make sure some people who don't belong in the Sterling family are thrown out for good." Leo just said, "Oh," and went back to his drawing. On the paper, he had drawn a big house. 2 people stood in front of it, one tall, one short. The tall one had long hair. The short one had a little ponytail. The door was open and a giant cat stood on the porch. Eleanor looked at the drawing, the corners of her mouth curving up. She picked up her phone and texted Margaret. "Mom, I'm flying back the day after tomorrow. Please schedule a meeting for me with all the extended branches of the Sterling family. I have scores to settle with them face to face." Margaret replied instantly. "Okay." Eleanor locked her phone. Outside, the setting sun painted a golden rim over the snowy peaks of Aspen. Spread out on the desk in front of her was a document. It was a corporate equity distribution chart for all the subsidiaries of the Sterling family. Next to a dense list of names were percentage markers. She picked up a red pen and circled a few of the names. These were the people who had leached off the company while Harrison was in charge. They took sterling salaries while running their own shell companies on the side. She held all the evidence of their kickbacks. The printed stacks of proof could fill half the desk. Eleanor capped the red pen and closed the folder. She looked out the window and whispered, "Harrison, did you really think this was the end? This is only the beginning." Harrison sat in Chloe's empty apartment for the entire night. It was only when the sky began to turn a hazy gray that he stood up. His knees were so stiff he couldn't bend them. He had to brace himself against the wall, shuffling out step by step. Downstairs, the doorman saw him and was startled. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need me to call an ambulance?" Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "No need." He walked outside and stood on the curb, pulling out his wallet to hail a cab. That was when he realized he only had a few crumpled bills left. He counted them. $50. His Centurion card was gone. His credit cards were maxed out and his bank accounts were all frozen. The only liquid cash he had to his name right now was this $50 bill. Standing on the streets of Manhattan in the early morning, the freezing wind made him shudder. He suddenly let out a laugh. The laugh was bitter and harsh, like chewing on broken glass. He hailed a yellow cab, gave the address for the Long Island estate, and stared out the window in silence for the entire ride. As they drove over the Queensboro Bridge, he saw a massive digital billboard displaying a teaser for Sterling Enterprises' new product launch. The brand ambassador was an A-list celebrity he had personally signed, but the text across the billboard read, "Welcome the glorious return of our executive chairwoman, Miss Eleanor Sterling." Harrison stared at that name for 3 seconds. Eleanor Sterling. Her name plastered across a Sterling Enterprises billboard, accompanied by a sleek, corporate headshot. She wore a sharp black suit, her hair slicked back, staring dead on into the camera with zero emotion. The photo was phenomenal. Even the tiny beauty mark on her brow was perfectly captured. Harrison had walked past that face countless times in the past, but he never knew she could look like this in front of a lens. Sharp, decisive, her eyes filled with the absolute certainty of someone holding all the cards. The cab driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Sir, we're here." Harrison snapped out of his daze, handed over his last $50, and stepped out. When he walked into the estate, Margaret was eating breakfast. A bowl of oatmeal and a side of fruit sat on the table. She gave him a look. "You didn't come back last night." Harrison gave a slight nod and sat down. "Mom, what's the situation at the company right now?" Margaret placed her spoon down. "Eleanor issued an announcement this morning. A new executive chair position has been created at headquarters. She's taking the role herself. Your old position is temporarily suspended. The board said they will decide whether to hire a replacement after the audit results come back." "Audit for what?" Margaret looked at him. "What do you think? The expense reports you signed, the project funds you approved, the corporate money you used to buy that woman a condo. Every single transaction involving company funds is under audit. Let me be clear with you. The audit team is an independent Wall Street firm Eleanor hired from the outside. They have no ties to the Sterling family. She sharpened this blade for 3 years. Do you really think they won't find anything?" Harrison's hand froze mid-air. The steam rising from the coffee mug blurred his vision. "How bad is it?" "Preliminary estimates suggest the recoverable funds are around $4 million, Margaret said. "If you add the late fees and breach of fiduciary duty penalties, your personal liability will be roughly $7 million. Harrison's fork dropped onto the table. $7 million. Every expense I signed off on was tied to an official project. They all had corresponding expenditure reports." Margaret cut him off. "Half of those projects were dummy accounts. The day after you signed the approval, the money was wired straight into Chloe's bank accounts. The audit team pulled the transaction logs. It's clear as day, son. Every single document you signed has your signature on it. You can't deny this debt." Harrison's face drained from pale to ash gray. He remembered the times he signed off on funds, never bothering to ask for details. Thomas would place a file on his desk and say, "Mr. Sterling, please sign here." And he would just take his Mont Blanc pen and scribble his name. He had never even read the project proposals. He figured since he was the boss, signing it didn't matter. But he wasn't the boss anymore. Every piece of paper he signed had now become the nail in his coffin. Harrison's new prepaid phone rang. He picked it up. It was an unknown number. He hesitated but answered. A cold, professional male voice spoke. "Are you Mr. Harrison Sterling? I am with the independent audit team investigating Sterling Enterprises. Per corporate policy, you are required to submit a personal asset declaration form within 7 business days to assist with your severance audit." "Who are you? Who gave you permission to audit my accounts?" The voice remained entirely flat. Under Section 146 of Corporate Law and Article 37 of Sterling Enterprises Internal Regulations, the majority shareholder has the right to initiate a comprehensive audit of all historical operational data, including your total expenditure history during your tenure. Please cooperate. Otherwise, we will initiate formal legal proceedings against you. The call ended. Harrison slammed the phone onto the table. He misjudged his strength and the phone slid off, crashing onto the floor. The screen cracked. Margaret watched him. "Don't take your anger out on your phone. If you want to be mad at Chloe. You chose to spend that money on her. No one forced you." Harrison hunched over in his chair, remaining silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up. "Mom, I want to see Eleanor." "She flies back the day after tomorrow," Margaret said. "You can contact her yourself, but don't expect her to go soft on you. She planned this for 3 years. Do you really think begging will make her stop? Do you think she's one of those sugar babies you used to keep?" Harrison didn't reply. He stood up and headed for the door. Margaret called out behind him, "Where are you going?" "Find a lawyer." He took an Uber to a law firm in Midtown. The senior partner there, Attorney Bennett, was an old college buddy. They used to grab drinks together. When Harrison walked in, the young receptionist recognized him. Her expression was awkward. "Mr. Bennett is in a meeting. Please wait." Harrison waited in the conference room for almost an hour before Bennett pushed the door open. When Bennett sat down, he wore a highly professional, practiced smile. "Harrison, long time no see." Harrison cut straight to the chase. "I need you to represent me in a divorce case and a corporate equity dispute." Bennett's smile didn't waver, but he leaned forward slightly. "Harrison, I need to be up front with you. Your wife, Miss Eleanor Sterling, already contacted our firm yesterday. She provided overwhelming evidence proving you committed gross misconduct during the marriage, including but not limited to marital infidelity, hiding marital assets, and inflicting emotional abuse on family members. She is suing for extreme emotional distress and dissipation of marital assets, demanding that you leave the marriage with absolutely nothing." "I don't agree. That company belongs to the Sterling family. What right does she have to take it?" Bennett slid a manila folder across the table. "Take a look at this." Harrison opened it. Inside was the equity transfer agreement signed by Margaret. It carried a red notary stamp. Attached was a supplementary agreement clearly stating that Margaret voluntarily transferred all her shares in Sterling Enterprises to her daughter-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, as compensation for her dedication to the family over the past 3 years. The agreement was notarized, confirming Margaret was of sound mind and fully capable of executing the transfer on the day she signed it. Harrison read the paper 3 times over. It was legally bulletproof. He recognized his mother's handwriting. The signature was crisp and clear. It was impossible to forge. Bennett looked at his expression and sighed. "Harrison, for the sake of our old college days, I'll tell you the truth. The chain of evidence your wife has built is ironclad. From her hospital records 3 years ago to the security footage of every hotel room you booked with Chloe. She has everything. Hiring any lawyer is useless. You cannot win this case. I supported her financially for 3 years. Every cent she spent was mine." Bennett cut him off. "Your wife's personal investments yielded massive returns over the past 3 years. She never spent a single dime of your money. The monthly allowance you wired her went straight into an isolated account. She still has the card. If you had bothered to check even once, you would know she never touched it." Harrison's mind exploded. That money, the $75,000 monthly allowance he sent Eleanor. Over 3 years, it totaled $2.7 million. He thought Eleanor had spent it, but she had never touched a cent. Bennett handed him a bank statement. It clearly listed every single transfer Harrison had made, and in the receiving account's balance column, the number was 0. Harrison stared at the statement for a long time, his voice dry. "Where is the money?" "Yesterday. She donated it all in your name," Bennett said, "to a children's charity fund. All $2.7 million donated. She only told you after it was gone." Harrison crushed the bank statement in his hand, balling it into a tight fist. The sharp edge of the paper sliced his palm, drawing blood. He stood up and walked out. Bennett called out to him from behind. "Harrison, one more thing. Your wife also retained us to handle the financial dispute between you and Chloe. The total amount you spent on her properties, cars, and gifts was $2 million. Yesterday, Chloe wired the exact amount back to your frozen account. You should check to see if it cleared." Harrison stood at the entrance of the law firm. The autumn wind swept past, messing up his hair. 3 days ago, he was the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, commanding thousands of employees with an 8-figure bank account, living in a $45 million mansion. 3 days later, he had nothing. The $50 in his pocket was his entire net worth. Harrison flagged down a taxi and gave the driver Thomas's address. He needed to find Thomas and demand answers. How much money did Eleanor pay this man to act out a 3-year charade right beside him? The cab arrived at Thomas's apartment building in Brooklyn. Harrison took the elevator up and pounded on the door. It opened. Thomas stood there in sweatpants. Sitting on the sofa behind him was Chloe. On the coffee table were 2 iced coffees and a stack of wedding invitations. Seeing him, Chloe let out a bright, mocking laugh. "Oh, look who's here, the CEO. Did you come to RSVP to our wedding?" Harrison glared at Thomas. "What's your relationship with her?" Thomas stepped aside. "Mr. Sterling, come in and sit. Chloe and I have known each other for 5 years. I helped her get into the acting industry. 3 years ago, when you said you wanted someone to keep you company, I recommended her. Chloe's only condition was that she would act the part, but nothing physical. Think about it. Every time you tried to get close, didn't she always use the excuse of feeling sick or being pregnant to avoid you?" Harrison's face went pale inch by inch. Those nights he held Chloe. Whenever he tried anything, she would turn over and say, "The baby kicked," or "My stomach hurts." He thought it was just normal pregnancy symptoms. He never once suspected a thing. Looking at his expression, Thomas chuckled. "Mr. Sterling, you are far too easy to fool. Your wife figured out your personality 3 years ago. You're arrogant. You believe whatever people tell you. You never verify anything. That was exactly what she wanted. She wanted you to live in the delusion you built for yourself, sinking deeper and deeper." Harrison lunged forward, grabbing Thomas by the collar and slamming him against the wall. Thomas didn't fight back. He just smiled. "Go ahead, hit me, Mr. Sterling. The second you do, I'll call the cops. With your current status, assault gets you at least a week in jail. Do you really want to go?" Harrison's fist hovered in the air, trembling violently. Chloe stood up from the couch, walked over, and linked her arm through Thomas's. "Wake up, Harrison. Eleanor told me your biggest flaw is that you never think you're wrong. When you lose the house, you blame her for being cruel. When you lose the money, you blame her for being ruthless. But what about you? If you had come home for dinner even once or looked at Leo just one time, you wouldn't be standing here right now." Harrison released Thomas's collar and took a step back. He slid down the hallway wall, burying his head in his knees, his shoulders shaking in ragged spasms. Thomas looked down at him and sighed. "Mr. Sterling, Eleanor asked me to pass along a message." Harrison didn't look up. Thomas said, "She said, you spent 3 years outside coddling Chloe. She spent 4 years at home waiting for Leo to grow up. Now she is done waiting. It's time for you to taste what it feels like to be left out in the cold." Thomas shut the door. Harrison sat alone outside that closed door. The motion sensor lights in the hallway flickered off, then on, then off again. He pulled out his phone and checked it. The screen was shattered, but he could still read the push notifications. It was all news, all his name. All the dirty secrets he thought he had buried perfectly were now ripped open and exposed to the sun. Harrison shoved the phone back into his pocket, slowly stood up, and used the wall to steady himself as he walked to the elevator. He didn't know where to go. If he went back to the estate, his mother would just look at him with disappointment. If he went to the company, security wouldn't even let him through the front doors. He scrolled through his contacts, realizing he had hundreds of numbers saved, but he couldn't think of a single person who would take his call now that he had fallen from grace. He walked out of the apartment building and stood on the sidewalk. The freezing autumn wind exposed his receding hairline. Next to him, a small TV in a bodega window was broadcasting the local news. The anchor enunciated perfectly. Harrison Sterling, former CEO of Sterling Enterprises, was ousted by the board today due to gross misconduct. Multiple personal assets have been frozen. The investigation is ongoing. The bodega clerk poked his head out, glanced at Harrison, then quickly ducked back inside. Harrison looked up at the TV screen showing his own face. The caption below read, "The Billionaire's Spectacular Fall." He suddenly remembered the line from Eleanor's journal. "I waited 3 years for you to turn back." But when he finally turned back, she was no longer standing there. Chapter 6. The Lethal Recording. Harrison squatted outside the bodega and smoked half a pack of cigarettes. He couldn't even remember when he started smoking. He never used to smoke. He always hated the smell it left on his clothes. But right now, squatting on the curb, his phone only had 3% battery left. His $50 had dwindled to 30. He had no idea where he was going to sleep tonight. His phone screen flashed with its final bit of battery. He glanced down. Another trending topic had popped up. Number Harrison Sterling Chloe uncut hotel footage. He clicked the link. The video had already surpassed 20 million views. The comment section was an absolute war zone. Harrison scrolled down. Someone wrote, "So this is the CEO. Good looking, but absolute garbage." Another wrote, "The mistress is so basic. She doesn't even deserve to be a home wrecker." Someone else replied, "Word is the real wife took the kid and left the state. The CEO is locked out of his own house." Good. The top comment read, "I heard this scumbag used company funds to fund his affair. Sterling Enterprises stock dropped 9% today. Retail investors are furious. Lock him up." Harrison turned his phone off. He stood up and wandered aimlessly down the avenue until he reached a pedestrian overpass above the FDR Drive. He stopped, leaned against the railing, and looked down. The endless stream of cars created rivers of red taillights. Every kind of dark thought rushed through his mind. His phone was completely dead. He stood there letting the freezing wind whip his face for 20 minutes before finally walking down the stairs. He hailed a taxi and gave the address for the Long Island estate. The driver looked at him and said, "Sir, you don't look so good. Do you need to go to a hospital?" Harrison shook his head. No need. It was late at night when he arrived at the estate. Margaret had left the door unlocked for him. A small lamp was left on in the living room. Harrison tiptoed upstairs, went into his old bedroom, didn't bother turning on the lights, and crashed onto the bed, staring into the darkness for hours. The next morning, he was woken by voices downstairs. He got up and walked down to find 3 people sitting in the living room: Margaret, Richard, and his uncle, Arthur Sterling. Richard sat in his wheelchair. He looked a bit more alert than usual, though his speech was still slurred. He had suffered a stroke the previous year, leaving half his body paralyzed, but his mind was still sharp. Arthur saw Harrison and gave a stiff nod. "Harrison, you're awake. Uncle Arthur, what brings you here?" Arthur sat down his teacup, glanced at Margaret, and said, "Your mother asked me to come today." She said, "There's a major issue regarding the Sterling family assets that needs to be discussed." Margaret stood up. "Harrison, sit down." Harrison took a seat on the sofa. Margaret cleared her throat and said, I called you here today, Arthur. To be perfectly clear, Eleanor is flying back the day after tomorrow. She currently holds 37.5% of Sterling Enterprises. She is the controlling shareholder. She called me and said that once she officially takes over, she will execute a total purge of the executive management. Arthur's brow furrowed deeply. A purge? How extensive? Margaret said it includes, but is not limited to, a complete re-evaluation of every position director level and above. Every nepotism hire will be fired. And as for you, extended family members, all those shell companies you've been running off the Sterling accounts will be systematically dismantled. Arthur's face changed colors. Those companies are independently operated. They have nothing to do with Sterling Enterprises. Margaret cut him off. Whether they have anything to do with the company or not, you know the truth. Those companies exclusively use Sterling's client roster. They leverage Sterling supply chains. Every single dollar of profit was leached directly from Sterling Enterprises' own flesh. Eleanor holds all the evidence. She said those who voluntarily liquidate their shell companies can part on good terms. But if she is forced to report them to the SEC herself, she will sue for damages, seize assets, and demand every single penny back. Arthur slammed his hand on the coffee table and stood up. She's an outsider. What right does she have to touch the Sterling family businesses? Margaret looked up at him, her tone deadpan. Because she is the majority shareholder. Because she holds the proof of your embezzlement. Because her last name is Vance, but her son's last name is Sterling. Before you start yelling at me, you might want to think about that construction materials firm under your name. The steel shipment you billed to Sterling last year, did you actually source that through legal channels? Arthur's face instantly flushed a violent red. Sitting on the side, Harrison watched the scene unfold, suddenly feeling an overwhelming sense of alienation. These people, his uncle, his aunts, his cousins, they used to greet him with deep bows, calling him Mr. Sterling. He always thought they respected him. Now he finally understood. They respected the CEO chair. Now that the person in the chair had changed in their eyes, Harrison was just a discarded piece of trash. Arthur hesitated for a moment, then finally sat back down. "Give me 2 days to think about it," Margaret said. "I can't give you 2 days. Eleanor arrives the day after tomorrow. You better give me your answer before her plane lands." Arthur stood up with a dark expression and stormed out. After the door shut, the living room fell silent. Richard suddenly mumbled something slurred. Margaret leaned in to listen, then looked up at Harrison. Harrison asked, "What did Dad say?" "Your father said he never thought you would bankrupt the family legacy this quickly," Margaret said. Harrison felt like he had been punched in the gut. Richard stared at him with cloudy, emotionless eyes. But that single slur sentence was more humiliating than any screaming match could ever be. Harrison stood up. "Mom, I'm going for a walk." He walked out the door, following the road outside the estate. He walked for over an hour until he reached a public park. He sat down on a bench. His phone was dead, so he just sat there watching the ducks swim in the lake. He suddenly remembered something. 3 years ago in the spring, Eleanor had told him the weather was nice and she was taking Leo to the park. He was answering emails at the time and didn't even look up. He just said, "Go ahead." Later, Eleanor posted a photo in the family group chat. Leo was wearing a little blue jacket, squatting by the lake looking at the ducks. Eleanor crouched next to him, pointing at them. Margaret had liked the photo. Richard had looked at it for a long time and commented, "Looks just like his dad when he was little." Did his dad mean Leo's biological father or him? Harrison. Harrison held his head in his hands, thinking hard. He couldn't remember. He couldn't even remember which park they had taken that photo in. He sat there for the entire afternoon. It wasn't until the sunset turned the lake a fiery orange that he stood up and walked back. As he approached the estate gates, he saw a black Mercedes parked in the driveway. A man wearing a gray overcoat stepped out. He wore gold-rimmed glasses and carried a briefcase. Seeing Harrison, the man gave a polite nod. Mr. Sterling, my name is Attorney Collins. I am Miss Eleanor Sterling's legal counsel. Harrison stopped walking. Why are you looking for me? Attorney Collins pulled a document from his briefcase and handed it over. Miss Eleanor authorized me to deliver formal legal correspondence regarding the dissolution of your marriage. In this letter, she states she is willing to proceed with an uncontested divorce on the condition that you sign this waiver, surrendering all claims to any marital assets. Harrison took the document, his fingers trembling slightly as he turned the pages. What gives her the right to demand I walk away with nothing? Attorney Collins pushed his glasses up his nose. Based on your prolonged cohabitation with another individual during the marriage, which constitutes severe fault. According to New York state laws regarding at-fault divorces, the injured party has the right to demand damages and is suing for extreme emotional distress and dissipation of marital assets. Miss Eleanor has already compiled an airtight chain of evidence. If you do not accept the uncontested divorce terms, she will file a formal lawsuit. What about Leo? What about custody? Attorney Collins cut him off. Leo's custody has nothing to do with you. The DNA paternity test has already been legally notarized. You share absolutely no biological relationship with the child. Legally speaking, you have zero standing to claim custody. The document slipped from Harrison's hands, fluttering to the ground. Attorney Collins bent down, picked it up, and handed it back, his tone still perfectly even. Mr. Sterling, Miss Eleanor asked me to relay a message. She gave you 3 years. You didn't value them. Please consider this agreement carefully. She returns the day after tomorrow and she expects your signature by then. Collins turned, got into his car, and drove away. Harrison stood in the courtyard. The autumn wind rustled the thick packet of papers in his hand. He looked down at the dense legal clauses. At the very bottom was Eleanor's pre-signed name. The signature was clean and sharp, just like her. What was she thinking when she signed it? Harrison carried the documents inside, went upstairs, and locked himself in his old office. He pulled the 3 journals from the drawer, flipped to the last page, and stared at that final line of text. He stared at it for a very long time. I waited 3 years for you to turn back. He raised his hand and touched his face. Something wet was sliding down his cheeks. He had only seen Eleanor cry twice in his life. Once when her mother died, and once when Leo was hospitalized with a severe fever. She had sat by the hospital bed, secretly wiping away tears. He had stood next to her for exactly 10 minutes before saying he had to get back to the office. Now sitting alone in this room, staring at her handwritten diaries. Every single page told him she had waited for him for 3 years, but he had never waited for her for a single day. Harrison buried his face in the leather cover of the journal. His tears soaked the material. His phone was still dead. He desperately wanted to send her a message, even just one word, but he no longer had any way to reach her. His mother was right. He deserved every bit of this. Chapter 7. The Paternity Truth. The next morning, when Harrison woke up, his phone was charging. He unplugged it and turned it on. A dozen missed calls and hundreds of text messages flooded the screen. He ignored them all, swiping them away until he saw a text from Margaret. Eleanor changed her flight. She arrives today at 3:00 p.m. Harrison checked the time. A.m. He threw off the covers, washed his face, changed into a clean shirt, and headed out. Parked in the driveway was his Maybach. Margaret had sent someone to retrieve it from the Greenwich mansion yesterday. He got in, started the engine, and put JFK Airport into the GPS. The highway was clear, but traffic hit hard right near the terminals. He leaned against the steering wheel, his fingers tapping anxiously. He spent the entire drive trying to figure out what he was going to say to her. He couldn't think of a single thing. When he finally parked and sprinted into the arrivals hall, the monitors showed that the flight from Aspen had landed 20 minutes ago. Harrison frantically scanned the crowd, pushing past tall travelers blocking his view. Finally, he spotted her. Eleanor was wearing a cream-colored trench coat, her hair flowing over her shoulders. She was holding the hand of a little boy in a blue puffer jacket. Standing right next to her was a tall, lean man in a dark gray suit, pulling a child's rolling luggage. When Harrison recognized the man's face, his blood boiled. He knew that man, Julian Hayes, an older classmate of Eleanor's from college, the heir to the Hayes family fortune. The first year Harrison and Eleanor were married. Julian had attended an event, handed Harrison a glass of champagne, said, "I hope you two are happy," and walked away. Harrison thought they had lost contact. But now Julian was standing right beside her, his hand resting casually on Leo's shoulder. The three of them were laughing and talking like a perfect family. Harrison shoved his way through the crowd and stormed over. When Eleanor saw him, her expression didn't change. She didn't even slow her pace. She just kept walking, holding Leo's hand. Harrison blocked her path. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this?" Eleanor stopped and looked at him, her tone completely flat. "What do you mean?" Harrison pointed at Julian. "Who is he? Why is he with you?" Eleanor looked down at Leo, gently nudging him toward Julian. "Julian, take Leo over there to get some ice cream." Julian nodded, took Leo's hand, and walked away. Before leaving, he shot Harrison a glance. The look was calm, but Harrison could clearly read the message in his eyes. You have no right to question her. Only after they were out of earshot did Eleanor turn her attention back to Harrison. "If you have something to say it here. I don't have much time. You took my company, sold my house, seized my shares. What more do you want?" Eleanor laughed. The laugh was identical to the one he saw on the Zoom call. Calm, cold, utterly devoid of warmth. "Harrison, are you still blaming me for taking your things? Tell me, which of those things did you actually earn yourself? Sterling Enterprises was built by your father. Since you graduated college and took over, what actual work have you done? Which major contract did you personally negotiate? You sat in that CEO chair signing your name for 3 years, and the company's net profits plummeted by 40%. Who do you think you are?" Harrison was choked by her words. Eleanor continued, "I sold the house under my own name. You seem to forget it was legally mine. The shares were voluntarily transferred by your mother. It had absolutely nothing to do with me manipulating her. As for that $2.7 million in allowance you sent me, I didn't touch a dime. I donated it all. And the money you blew on Chloe, she wired every cent back to you. Every single dollar I am holding right now has absolutely zero connection to you. What right do you have to stand here and interrogate me?" Harrison clenched his fists. "What about Leo? Did you ask me before you took him? I raised him for 4 years. You just take him away without a word." Eleanor cut him off. "Leo has nothing to do with you. You saw the paternity test, didn't you? He's not your son. You don't share a single drop of blood with him. You raised him for 4 years. Put your hand over your heart and ask yourself, how many meals did you feed him? How many times did you bathe him? Have you ever read him a single bedtime story?" Harrison's face flushed a deep, embarrassed red. Seeing his expression, Eleanor's tone softened just a fraction. "Harrison, I know you are hurting right now, but look back at your actions. When you were holding Chloe in your arms, did you ever stop to think if I was hurting? When you were taking her out to fancy dinners every weekend, did you ever think about the hundreds of dinners I ate alone at that dining table? You stand here and claim you raised him for 4 years. What exactly did you raise him with?" Harrison's lips trembled, his voice barely a whisper. "Then tell me, who is Leo's real father?" Eleanor was silent for 2 seconds. "It's none of your business. Tell me." Eleanor looked him dead in the eye. "Fine, I will tell you. Leo is my child with my ex-husband." Harrison's brain short-circuited. "Ex-husband? You were married before me? To who?" "I wasn't married before you. I am referring to the night you spent at a hotel with Chloe. I had a 102-degree fever and went to the ER alone. While I was on an IV drip at midnight, I signed the consent forms for IVF. Leo has no father. His biological father is an anonymous donor from a sperm bank. I carried him, gave birth to him, and raised him. It has absolutely nothing to do with you." Harrison stood paralyzed. IVF, sperm bank. He chewed on those words repeatedly until it finally clicked. No wonder Eleanor never let him go to the prenatal checkups. From the very beginning, she never intended for Leo to have any connection to him. He thought the pregnancy was an accident, but it was a choice she made. Just 2 months into their marriage, she had decided that her child's father didn't need to be a living, present man. "Why didn't you tell me?" Eleanor fired back. "If I told you, what would you have thought? Would you have accepted him as your child? At that time, your head was entirely filled with Chloe. You didn't even care when my fever spiked to 102. If I told you I did IVF, how would you have looked at me?" Harrison couldn't say a single word because she was right. At that point in his life, he never would have accepted it. He would have thought she was insane, demanded she abort the pregnancy, and said unforgivable things. Eleanor looked at his face and gently shook her head. "Whatever happened between us has nothing to do with Leo. He's 4 years old. He needs to grow up in a normal family environment. You know exactly what kind of father you were. You couldn't even remember the exact date of his birthday." Harrison opened his mouth to argue, but searching his memory, he realized it was true. He only remembered that a few days before Leo's birthday, Eleanor would remind him, saying, "Leo's birthday is coming up. Are you going to buy a gift?" And he would just pull out his phone, tell Thomas to buy something expensive, and consider his duty done. He had never personally picked out a single gift for the boy. Seeing his silence, Eleanor turned to leave. Harrison reached out and grabbed her wrist. "Wait!" Eleanor stopped, looked down at his hand, gripping her wrist, and then looked back up at him. "Let go." He didn't. "Give me a chance to fix this." Eleanor finally showed a shift in expression, as if she had just heard the most ridiculous joke in the world. "You want to fix this? How do you plan to do that? Go back and break up with Chloe? You should have done that 3 years ago. You want to take the company back? The company is mine now. You want to start over and woo me? Harrison, you don't even know who I am, what I like to eat, or what I hate. How could you possibly woo me? I remember you love sweet things." Eleanor let out a sharp laugh. "I hate sweet things. I always have. You're confusing me with Chloe. She is the one who likes sweets." Harrison's hand went rigid. She was right. He had confused her preferences with his mistress's. Eleanor reached down and peeled his fingers off her wrist. Her movements were gentle but carried an undeniable force. "Harrison, you have 3 things completely wrong. First, I was never waiting for you to turn back. I was waiting for the day I had enough power to leave on my own terms. Second, Leo is not your child. Don't ever bring this up again." Third, she looked deep into his eyes. "We are finished. From the very first night you didn't come home and slept at Chloe's, this marriage was dead. I just spent 3 years planning its funeral." Standing in the bustling arrivals hall of JFK, tears suddenly welled up in Harrison's eyes without warning. He was a man who never cried. Growing up, his mother used to say his tears were made of gold, but over the past few days, he had shed more tears than he had in the previous 30 years combined. Seeing him cry, Eleanor paused for a second, but quickly returned to her cold composure. "What are you crying for? Are you crying because your $45 million mansion is gone, or because your CEO title was taken away?" Harrison shook his head. "You cried for 3 years. I've only cried for 3 days." Eleanor froze. Harrison wiped his face roughly with his sleeve. His voice was raspy as sandpaper. "Can you just give me one chance? Let me make up for those 3 years." Eleanor stared at his red-rimmed eyes. She remained silent for a long time. Then she said, "Harrison, do you know what the hardest day of those 3 years was for me?" Harrison shook his head. "It was the day I gave birth. At a.m., my water broke. I drove myself to the hospital. The nurses asked where my husband was. I said he was on his way. I waited in that delivery room for 5 hours. The contractions were so painful I almost passed out. But you never answered a single call. That day was Chloe's birthday. You were busy throwing her a party. When I finally delivered Leo, the nurse brought him to me. He was so tiny, his little face purple from crying. At that exact moment, I made a promise to myself. For the rest of my life, I would never let anyone treat me like that again. Harrison stood completely still. Tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. His lips trembled violently before he finally managed to choke out 2 words. "I'm sorry, I waited for you for 3 years, but those words mean nothing to me now." She turned and walked toward Julian and Leo. Her steps were fast and steady. She crouched down, wiped a smudge of ice cream from Leo's face, stood up, said something to Julian, and the 3 of them walked toward the parking garage. Harrison stood rooted to the spot, watching her back get further and further away. Leo turned around to look at him. Those big bright eyes stared as he called out, "Dad." Eleanor gently turned the boy's head forward. "Don't look back, Leo." Leo said, "Okay," and obediently looked forward, watching that tiny figure disappear through the sliding glass doors. Harrison's legs suddenly gave out. He collapsed to his knees right there on the terminal floor. People around him turned to stare. Some pulled out their phones to record, but he knelt there, unmoving. The hard marble floor bit into his knees, sending shooting pains up his legs. But it was nothing compared to the pain of her words. She said the contractions hurt for 5 hours. She called him over and over, and he never picked up. He was at a VIP lounge cutting a cake for Chloe. She had laughed and smeared frosting on his face. He stood there surrounded by balloons and streamers, holding a glass of champagne, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, Eleanor was in a sterile hospital room at Mount Si. The nurses handed her the phone 5 times. She dialed his number 5 times, all unanswered. Finally, the nurse had gently said, "Mrs. Sterling, please stop calling. Your husband might be busy. Do you want us to call a doula?" Eleanor put the phone down and said, "No need, I will do it myself." And she did. Chapter 8, The Mistress's Betrayal. Harrison knelt on the floor of the airport terminal for nearly 10 minutes. Finally, a janitor approached, tapped him on the shoulder, and asked, "Sir, are you okay? People are walking by. It doesn't look good for you to be down there." Harrison slowly stood up. The skin on his knees was scraped raw, small beads of blood seeping through. He dragged his stiff legs out of the airport and got into his car, but he didn't start the engine. He just slumped over the steering wheel for a very long time. By the time he finally lifted his head, the sky had turned dark. He drove back to the Long Island estate. As he walked in, Margaret was looking at her iPad. Seeing him, she turned the screen toward him. "Look at this." Harrison glanced at it. It was a YouTube video. He recognized the background instantly. It was the living room of Chloe's luxury apartment. But the video wasn't an illicit hidden camera recording. It was Chloe herself, sitting on the sofa talking directly to the camera. The video title read, "Exclusive Confession from Harrison Sterling's Mistress." It was all an act. Harrison clicked play. Chloe wore light makeup and a beige cardigan. Her expression was deeply sincere, entirely different from her usual persona. She said, "Hi everyone, I'm Chloe Davis. I recorded this video today because I want to clear up exactly what happened between me and Mr. Sterling." She took a deep breath. She said, "Mr. Sterling and I never actually had an improper relationship. 3 years ago, someone approached me and paid me to act out a role. The goal was to secure evidence of Mr. Sterling's infidelity for a divorce proceeding. I took the money. I admit what I did was wrong, but I have to speak the truth. Harrison Sterling never laid a finger on me. My pregnancy was entirely fake. The baby bump was a silicone belly made by a prop designer. In the video, Chloe's eyes grew red, her voice cracking slightly. She said, "My conscience has been eating away at me for months. Today I decided to come clean. Everything was a pre-written script. Mr. Sterling, who I acted alongside, had absolutely no idea. He thought I genuinely loved him, but I just took the money to complete a job. At the end of the video, Chloe bowed to the camera. She said, "I am so sorry I lied to everyone, and I am sorry to Mrs. Sterling. I should never have interfered in your marriage." The video ended. The comment section had completely exploded. The top voted comment read, "Holy the plot twist of the century. The CEO was scammed for 3 years, and the wife was the mastermind pulling the strings the whole time." The second read, "So Chloe was just a hired actress. That means Harrison Sterling was played for an absolute fool from day one." The third serves him right. If he had treated his wife better, he wouldn't have fallen into the trap. The fourth, never mess with a woman, especially a silent one. Eleanor played him like a fiddle. Harrison handed the iPad back to Margaret. He felt like his skin had been peeled off layer by layer. He already knew Chloe was working for Eleanor, but hearing Chloe tell the entire world to his face felt entirely different. It felt like being stripped naked in public, every single humiliating flaw exposed to the glaring sun. Margaret said, 2 hours after this video was posted, the view count hit 10 million. The entire internet is calling you an idiot. I know. Margaret said, "There's something else." After this video went live, your uncles and cousins completely panicked. They were hoping you could somehow turn the tables and take the company back. But Chloe's confession proved to the world that you were bait in a trap from day one. Now the extended family is terrified. They are all hiding. What about Eleanor? She already arrived at the corporate headquarters. Margaret said tonight she's holding an internal executive meeting. Everyone management level and above is required to attend. Your Uncle Arthur called me this morning. He agreed to dissolve his shell company and return the profits. Your Aunt Sarah also texted me asking if I could arrange a dinner with Eleanor. Harrison sat on the sofa staring at the ceiling. He suddenly let out a laugh. It was a miserable, hollow laugh. Everyone was running to Eleanor. Everyone was sucking up to her. He was the only person in the entire Sterling family completely exiled from the circle. His phone buzzed. A friend request popped up on WhatsApp. The name read Chloe. He accepted it. Chloe sent a long voice memo. He pressed play on speaker. Her voice was much more genuine than in the video. She said, "Mr. Sterling, I posted that video today because Eleanor told me to. She wanted everything out in the open. I want to apologize to you. I lied to you a lot over the past 3 years. Even though you are not a good person, being kept in the dark like that is pretty brutal." Harrison typed back a single sentence. "How much did she pay you?" Chloe replied instantly. "Take a guess. Let's just say it was a lot more than all the money you threw at me combined." Harrison tossed his phone onto the sofa and closed his eyes. Sitting across from him, Margaret watched her son's defeated posture inside. "Harrison, what are you going to do now?" "I don't know," Margaret said. "You lost your CEO position. Your money is gone. Your wife and child left you, and your mistress betrayed you. You are completely alone. Do you plan to just lay down and die? The shares belong to Eleanor now, but she won't let the Sterling family starve. Your father's care, my living expenses, she arranged everything. But you're the only one she made zero arrangements for. I know you cannot just give up." Margaret said, "If you are angry, clean yourself up and start over. If you accept defeat, then admit that your days of luxury are over and it's time to work for a living. But you cannot sit in that office crying every day. Crying won't bring anything back." Harrison didn't say a word. He walked upstairs, went into the office, and sat at the desk. He opened one of the 3 journals. He flipped to a random page in the middle. "I went to the office to bring him soup today. His assistant said he wasn't in. I waited in the lobby for half an hour. I saw him step out of the elevator. There was a woman next to him. She was very pretty and had a sweet smile. I hid behind a potted plant. I didn't know who she was, but I watched him open the passenger side door of his car for her. He has never once opened the car door for me." Harrison's finger traced the ink of that sentence. He thought hard about that day. Finally, he remembered Chloe had come to the office asking him to review a brand endorsement contract for her. He took her out to lunch. He opened the passenger door of his Maybach for her. Eleanor was standing in the lobby holding a thermos of soup. He completely missed her. Later, he saw that thermos sitting on his desk. It was cold. He didn't drink it. He told Thomas to throw it away. He never knew it was soup Eleanor had spent hours making from scratch. Harrison closed the journal and stood up. He walked to the window, staring out at the pitch-black courtyard. He suddenly made a decision. He had to start over. He knew Eleanor would never forgive him, but at the very least, he had to make himself worthy of the word regret. He pulled out his phone and searched for open positions at Sterling Enterprises. Nothing fit him. He searched other companies. After flipping through a few pages, he found a small investment firm hiring a project manager. The requirements were simple: bachelor's degree, 5 years of experience, knowledge of venture capital. Harrison thought about it, quickly drafted a resume, and hit send. He used to manage the massive empire of Sterling Enterprises. Applying to be a project manager at a no-name firm was humiliating, but he sent it anyway. After he hit send, he felt the crushing boulder on his chest lighten just a fraction of an inch. But a second later, his phone rang. It was a young, crisp, female voice. "Hello, is this Harrison Sterling? I saw the resume you just submitted. I'm so sorry, but I need to be upfront with you. Our boss said, we are absolutely not hiring former management from Sterling Enterprises, especially anyone with the last name Sterling because my last name is Sterling. You won't hire me?" The woman let out an awkward laugh. "Yes. The boss said the Sterling name is too toxic right now. He's worried it will damage our company's reputation. Sorry about that. Good luck with your search." The call disconnected. Harrison gripped the phone, standing by the window in a daze. Suddenly, he let out a bitter, resigned chuckle. His reputation was so thoroughly destroyed, he couldn't even get an entry-level corporate job. He dialed Margaret's number. "Mom, I need a favor." "What is it?" "I've been looking for work, but no one will hire me. Do you have any connections? Any job that doesn't require showing my face? I'll take anything. I'm not picky anymore." Margaret was silent for a moment. "The fact that you're thinking like this is progress. I will ask around." Harrison hung up and leaned against the window, staring blankly into the night. His phone buzzed again. It was a text from Eleanor's executive assistant. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Eleanor asked me to notify you that the Sterling Enterprises' new product launch is the day after tomorrow. She invites you to attend. She said it is entirely up to you whether you come, but she also said she hopes you will be there." Harrison stared at that message for a long time. "She hopes you will be there." Those words made his heart clench violently. He typed a single word back, "Okay." The assistant immediately sent another text. "Miss Eleanor also requested that you bring the signed divorce agreement with you. She wants to collect it in person." Harrison's hands went numb. So that was what those words were leading to. The tiny sliver of hope that had flared in his chest was effortlessly crushed into dust. Yet he still replied with one word, "Okay." The cold night air seeped through the window glass. Harrison sat down at the desk, pulled out the divorce agreement, and read through it one more time. The clause demanding he leave with absolutely nothing was printed in stark, undeniable text. He found a pen and hovered over the signature line for a long time. Finally, he signed. Eleanor Sterling's name was printed cleanly above the line. He wrote his own name below it. As the pen scratched against the paper, his hand was steady, but his chest ached so badly he almost doubled over. He placed the signed agreement into an envelope, sealed it, and lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling until dawn. Just as the sun began to rise, he drifted into a restless sleep. In his dreams, he was standing outside a delivery room holding a thermos of soup, but no matter how hard he pushed, the door would not open. Chapter 9. Desperate Strike. Harrison was woken up by his phone ringing. He grabbed it. The caller ID showed his Uncle Arthur. Harrison answered. And before he could even speak, Arthur began screaming at him. "Harrison, where the hell are you? Do you realize Eleanor is hosting a press conference this afternoon?" "I know. She invited me," Arthur yelled. "Are you insane? She tells you to go, so you go. She's going to drag your name through the mud in front of the entire city. Do you have any idea what she is announcing today? She is announcing a total corporate restructuring of Sterling Enterprises. She's going after your father's equity, too." Harrison sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Uncle Arthur, those things have nothing to do with me anymore," Arthur screamed. "How does it have nothing to do with you? You are the eldest son of the Sterling family. Sterling Enterprises belongs to us, not the Vance family. Are you just going to roll over and let this outsider woman step on our necks?" Harrison leaned against the headboard, his voice perfectly calm. "Uncle Arthur, did you liquidate your construction materials company?" Arthur paused, caught off guard. "No." "Then go talk to her yourself." "I am done caring," Arthur yelled. "What kind of attitude is that? I helped you for years, and this is how you treat me." Harrison gave a dry laugh. "Uncle Arthur, how exactly did you help me? Half the project funds you asked me to approve went straight into your own shell company. The auditors are ripping through those exact files right now. The financial hole you dug is big enough to bury you. I am currently staring down the barrel of a $7 million lawsuit from the company, and you think you helped me?" Arthur was rendered speechless. The line was dead silent for a few seconds before Arthur slammed the phone down. Harrison tossed his phone aside, got out of bed, washed his face, and put on a clean, pressed dress shirt. He was going to that press conference. He knew Eleanor invited him so she could publicly collect the divorce papers and officially declare the end of their marriage. But he was still going. He owed it to her. As he walked downstairs, Margaret was standing by the steps. She looked him up and down. "You look sharp. Good. You can't show up looking like a beggar and embarrass yourself." Margaret gave a small smile, part pride, part sorrow. "Go on. No matter how it ends, your mother will always have a plate of food waiting for you at home." Harrison nodded and walked out. He drove his Maybach to the Sterling Enterprises headquarters in Manhattan. As he approached, he saw the red carpet rolled out. The sidewalks were packed with press. Camera flashes fired relentlessly, illuminating the entire plaza. He parked his car and walked toward the entrance. The security guards recognized him, hesitated for a moment, and eventually let him through. Inside the main hall, hundreds of people were seated. The front rows were packed with journalists. The middle rows held corporate partners. The back rows were filled with employees and management. Harrison found an empty seat in a dark corner in the very back. On the stage, the massive backdrop read, "Sterling Enterprises Strategic Restructuring and Product Launch." At exactly 300 p.m., the house lights dimmed, then brightened. The host's voice echoed through the speakers. "Please welcome the new executive chairwoman of Sterling Enterprises, Miss Eleanor Sterling." The room erupted in applause. Harrison clapped too, though his empty hands felt hollow. Eleanor walked onto the stage from the wings. She wore a sleek, tailored black dress. Her hair was pulled back tightly, highlighting her sharp jawline. She stepped up to the microphone and smiled. "Thank you all for coming today." The room fell silent. "Today's conference will cover two main topics," she said. "First, the strategic pivot of Sterling Enterprises for the next 5 years. Second, a personal announcement I need to make." She spoke about corporate strategy for 15 minutes. Sitting in the corner, Harrison listened intently. He realized that when this woman spoke about business, her logic was flawless. She commanded the data effortlessly. The corporate partners in the front row nodded continuously in agreement. Harrison had never seen Eleanor lead a meeting before. In his mind, she had always been just an ordinary housewife who cooked and took care of the kid. But the Eleanor on stage and the Eleanor in his memory seemed like two entirely different human beings. After wrapping up the strategy portion, Eleanor paused. She reached beneath the podium and pulled out a white envelope. Harrison recognized it instantly. It was the divorce agreement he had signed. Eleanor held up the envelope. Taking this opportunity today, I would like to share a personal yet significant piece of news. My ex-husband, Mr. Harrison Sterling, and I have formally terminated our marriage. The legal proceedings were finalized this afternoon. I am grateful for the experiences of the past, and I wish him the best in finding the life that truly belongs to him. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People turned around in their seats trying to spot Harrison in the audience. Harrison lowered his head slightly, but he didn't hide. He sat there letting the stares burn into him. Eleanor placed the envelope down. Now that that is out of the way, let us screen the promotional video for our new product line. As the massive screen lit up, Harrison's attention was suddenly drawn to the front row. He saw his uncle Arthur furiously typing on his phone. Arthur looked intensely agitated, sweat dripping down his forehead. A dark sense of dread curled in Harrison's stomach. He quickly pulled out his phone and texted Eleanor's assistant. "Watch my Uncle Arthur. He is acting erratic today." The assistant did not reply. The press conference proceeded smoothly. After the video, Eleanor spent 20 minutes breaking down market positioning and sales forecasts. Everything was going perfectly. Then came the final segment, the Q&A. A reporter stood up and asked, "Miss Sterling, can you disclose whether Sterling Enterprises will undergo a major overhaul of its supply chain?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, there will be changes. We are already in negotiations with several new top-tier suppliers." Suddenly, Arthur shot up from his seat and screamed, "You are lying!" The entire room gasped. Every camera violently whipped around, lenses focusing dead on Arthur. Arthur pointed at the stage. "The supply chain was built from the ground up by my brother, Richard. If you want to change suppliers, you need board approval." Eleanor stood on stage, looking down at her uncle. Her expression didn't change. She simply narrowed her eyes. "Uncle Arthur, do you have objections to the supply chain adjustments?" "Excellent. I happen to have a document here I would like you to review." She pulled a thick manila folder from the podium, opened it, and pulled out a stack of papers. She looked out at the press. Inside this folder is the complete financial record of Mr. Arthur Sterling exploiting Sterling Enterprises procurement channels for his personal company's gain over the past 5 years. The total sum involved exceeds $5 million. The contracts, bank transfer logs, and email trails are L here, she continued. "I originally didn't plan to discuss this publicly, but since my uncle has chosen to stand up and publicly question my authority, I will let everyone in this room judge for themselves." Arthur's face drained of all color. "You are talking nonsense. That is my own private business." Eleanor tapped a button, projecting the first page of the document onto the massive screen. It clearly listed over 24 wire transfers. The recipient was Arthur's construction materials firm. The memo line for every single transfer read, "Sterling Enterprises Procurement." Arthur stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. The room exploded. Reporters scrambled to snap photos. The camera flashes relentlessly illuminated Arthur's pale, bloated, terrified face. From his corner seat, Harrison watched his uncle's spectacular downfall. He felt a deep sense of irony. Just 2 days ago, Arthur had called him a useless failure. Today, Arthur was the one being publicly executed on stage. Eleanor gathered the papers. Her tone remained perfectly calm. "This matter will be handed over to the audit committee and our legal team. We will pursue full restitution through all legal avenues. That concludes today's press conference. Thank you all." She turned to step off the stage. At that exact moment, Arthur suddenly reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a switchblade, gripping it tightly, and charged the stage. Harrison saw the glint of the blade in a split second. Arthur was screaming incoherently. "You ruined the Sterling family. I'm going to kill you." He charged at Eleanor like a rabid bull. Screams erupted across the room. Harrison launched himself from his chair and sprinted toward the stage. He moved faster than he ever thought possible. He grabbed Arthur's knife-wielding arm, violently twisting it backward, and used his other arm to put Arthur in a chokehold from behind. Arthur was completely immobilized. The switchblade clattered to the floor. Security guards swarmed the stage, tackling Arthur to the ground. Throughout the entire chaotic struggle, Harrison kept his body positioned firmly between the blade and Eleanor. Eleanor stood behind him, staring at his broad back. Her breathing was ragged for a few seconds before she slowly calmed down. She whispered, "Thank you." Harrison turned to look at her. His face was covered in sweat. He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't thank me. This is the first time in my life I've ever taken a hit for you." Eleanor's eyes flickered, but she quickly looked away. Security dragged Arthur out. The reporters were ushered into the lobby. The room remained chaotic for a while before finally settling down. Harrison stood on the stage, his hands still shaking. He had never been in a physical fight in his life. He didn't even know where he found the strength just now. Eleanor looked down at his trembling hand. She paused and said, "Your hand is bleeding." Harrison looked down. The webbing between his thumb and index finger on his right hand had been sliced open by the blade. Blood was steadily dripping onto the floor. In the adrenaline rush, he hadn't even felt it. The assistant rushed over with a first aid kit. Eleanor took the gauze and antiseptic herself, cleaning the cut and wrapping it tightly. Her movements were fast and efficient. Harrison looked down at her hands, wrapping his wound. He suddenly felt that taking a knife for her was entirely worth it. Eleanor finished tying off the bandage, took a step back and said, "Go to the hospital and get it stitched. I'll handle the cleanup here. I'm not leaving." Eleanor looked up at him. "Why? The day I left you alone in the delivery room, you wanted me to stay. I didn't. Today I am staying right here. You don't have to kick me out." Eleanor was momentarily silenced by his words. She turned and walked away. Harrison saw her raise a hand to quickly wipe the corner of her eye. But when she turned back, her expression was completely neutral. She said, "Stay if you want." And so Harrison stayed. He sat in a chair by the stage, waiting while the police arrived to take his statement. He helped the staff clean up the remaining chairs and debris, staying until he was the very last person to leave the hall. When he finally walked out of the building, it was pitch black outside. He stood at the bottom of the steps looking up at the towering glass facade of Sterling Enterprises. In the past, he used to stand at the floor, toe-ceiling window of the top-floor penthouse office, looking out at the skyline, feeling like the entire city belonged to him. Now, standing at the bottom, looking up, he noticed that the light in the top-floor office was still on. Eleanor was still up there. Harrison pulled out his phone and sent her a text message. "Thank you for bandaging my hand today." A few minutes later, she replied with a single word, "Okay." Harrison stared at that, "Okay," and smiled. 3 years ago, she had sent him a video of Leo learning to walk. He had replied with, "Okay." Now she had returned the exact same word to him. He slipped the phone into his pocket, looked up at the glowing window one last time, and turned toward the parking garage. After 2 steps, he stopped and looked back. Standing by the window was a silhouette. The figure stood there for a moment before pulling the blinds shut. The corners of Harrison's mouth curled into a genuine smile. He turned and walked away into the night. Chapter 10. The Return of the Queen. 3 months later, the Sterling Enterprises headquarters had been completely renovated. The lobby featured the company's modernized branding. Behind the receptionist desk hung a massive photograph of Eleanor from the product launch, standing powerfully in front of a screen of data charts. Outside the building, a red ribbon-cutting stage had been set up, flanked by towering floral arrangements. Today was the first public event since the completion of Sterling's corporate restructuring. It was also the day of the Q1 earnings report, Eleanor's first full quarter as the official executive chairwoman. The plaza was packed. Journalists, venture capitalists, corporate partners, and employees filled the space. Harrison stood at the very back of the crowd. He was wearing a dark gray wool PC coat. His hair was cropped shorter than before. He looked significantly leaner than he had 3 months ago, but the depressive fog that used to cloud his eyes had cleared, replaced by a quiet, grounded calm. Over the past 3 months, he had found a job. He was working as a logistics dispatcher for a mid-sized freight company in Queens. The pay was low. He took home less than $4,000 a month. Compared to his old life, it was absolute pennies. But he clocked in on time every day, worked hard, and spent his weekends at the Long Island estate, eating dinner with his mother. Occasionally, he would take his father downstairs in his wheelchair to get some sun and stretch his legs. His life was mundane and quiet, but for the first time, he felt a sense of solid peace. He had taken a half-day off work to be here today. When he asked for the time off, his manager had stared at his face for a long time before asking, "Are you that Harrison Sterling?" Harrison replied, "I used to be that Harrison Sterling. Now I'm just the dispatcher working under you." The manager patted him on the back and laughed. "All right, I'll give you half a day. Keep your head down." Harrison smiled. "I will now." Standing at the edge of the plaza, he looked at the familiar faces on the ribbon-cutting stage. Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Brooks, and Mr. Reynolds were all there, along with several new faces. Top-tier executives Eleanor had poached from Wall Street over the past 3 months. At exactly a.m., the music swelled. Eleanor walked out the front doors. She was wearing a stunning tailored crimson suit, the skirt ending just above her knees, paired with matching heels. Her hair was styled in soft, voluminous waves. The moment she stepped onto the stage, the camera flashes erupted like a strobe light. Harrison watched her from the back of the crowd. He felt that this woman was more radiant and commanding than in any memory he had of her. Standing next to her was a tall man. Harrison recognized him instantly. Julian Hayes. Julian wore a sharp black suit and held a microphone, serving as the MC for the event. Watching the two of them stand side by side on stage, Harrison didn't feel the violent, gut-wrenching pain he had felt 3 months ago. That pain had dulled into a faint, lingering ache, like a scar that occasionally itched, but no longer bled. After Eleanor gave her speech, it was time for the ribbon cutting. The red ribbon was pulled taut, and several people snipped it simultaneously with golden scissors. The crowd erupted into deafening cheers and applause. Afterward, Eleanor stepped down from the stage to shake hands with the VIP guests. Harrison originally planned to just watch from a distance and leave quietly, but Eleanor's gaze swept over the crowd and landed precisely on him. She paused, excused herself, and walked straight toward him. The crowd naturally parted to let her through. Harrison stood completely still. Eleanor stopped in front of him, looking him up and down. "You lost weight, work is busy, dieting." Eleanor gave a small smile. "Does a dispatcher job really work you that hard? Don't underestimate it. Dispatchers have a lot on their plate." Eleanor looked at him and said, "I'm glad you came today. I promised I would. I don't break my promises anymore." They stood in silence for a few seconds. Suddenly, Eleanor reached into her pocket, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to him. Harrison took it, opened it, and glanced inside. It was a cashier's check. He counted the zeros. He looked up at her, confused. "What is this?" "The audit case against you is closed. We recovered about $5 million from your Uncle Arthur's assets. The remaining $2 million, I paid it off for you. You can pay me back slowly. I'm in no rush." Harrison held the check, stunned for a long time. "Why would you pay off my debt?" Eleanor looked away toward the skyline. Her voice was very soft. "Because you took that knife for me at the press conference. I owed you that much." Harrison looked down at the massive sum on the check, then looked back up at her. The corners of his mouth turned up into a smile. "I don't think I'll be able to pay you back in this lifetime. As long as you know, just pay it back slowly." She turned to leave, but after 2 steps, she looked back. "By the way, Leo is here today. He is playing backstage with Julian. Do you want to see him?" Harrison's heart skipped a heavy beat. Am I allowed to? He wants to see you. Over the past 3 months, he has asked me where his dad went at least 3 times. Harrison's eyes instantly welled up with tears. He fought to keep his voice steady. Then, I want to see him. Eleanor led him around the building to a private green room backstage. Inside, Leo was sprawled over a small table, furiously coloring with crayons. Julian sat next to him, sharpening pencils. When Leo looked up and saw Harrison walk in, his eyes lit up. He dropped his crayon, ran over, and threw his arms around Harrison's legs. "Dad!" Harrison dropped to his knees and pulled the boy tightly into his arms. Holding this tiny, soft body, he felt that every single ounce of suffering he had endured over the past 3 months was entirely worth it. Leo rested his chin on Harrison's shoulder. "Dad, why haven't you come to see me all these months? Mommy said you were working. Is work that busy?" Harrison's voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, very busy. But from now on, Dad is going to come see you every single weekend. Is that okay?" "Okay, then next time you have to take me to the park to see the ducks." "Deal. We'll go see the ducks." Eleanor leaned against the door frame, watching them. Her expression remained composed, but the light in her eyes wavered slightly. Julian walked over to her and whispered, "What are you going to do?" "Well, see. I'm not in a rush." Julian smiled. "All right, I'll wait for your we'll see." Harrison stood up, holding Leo. He looked at Eleanor. "I signed the divorce agreement. I will pay back the money. I won't ask for anything else. Just one thing. Please don't stop me from seeing Leo. If you come every weekend, I will have my driver pick you up." Harrison's eyes grew hot again. This time, he couldn't hold it back. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He quickly raised his hand to wipe it away. Leo noticed. "Dad, are you crying?" "No, just got some dust in my eye." Leo wiggled out of his arms, ran back to the table, grabbed a piece of paper, and handed it to him. "Here, I drew this for you." Harrison looked down. It was a drawing of 3 people, one tall, one short, and one even shorter. The tall one was wearing a red dress. The short one was wearing a blue shirt. The smallest one had a tiny ponytail. The 3 of them were holding hands in front of a big house. Above the house was a massive bright yellow sun written clumsily. Next to them were the words, Dad, Mom, and Leo. Harrison held that piece of paper, staring at it for a very, very long time. He carefully folded it and placed it into the breast pocket of his coat, right over his heart. He crouched down and ruffled Leo's hair. Dad is going to keep this safe forever. Watching him. Eleanor slightly turned her face away, pressing her lips together to hide any trace of softening emotion. Harrison stood up, looked at her, and said, "Thank you. What are you thanking me for? You haven't hidden him away from me. You called him your son for 4 years. I couldn't just hide him from you." Harrison looked at her and suddenly smiled. It was a smile full of relief, gratitude, and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. He said, "Then I will come over every weekend. Please don't get sick of me. Depends on my mood." She turned and walked out of the room. Her high heels clicked sharply against the marble floor. After 2 steps, she stopped, glanced over her shoulder, and said, "Frame that drawing. Hang it over your bed. Don't let it get wrinkled." Harrison paused. Then a broad smile broke across his face. "I won't." Eleanor walked away. Julian followed her out. The green room was left to just Harrison and Leo. Leo went back to the table and picked up his crayon. Without looking up, he said, "Dad, I'm hungry. What do you want to eat?" "I want ice cream." "All right, Dad will take you to get ice cream, but you can only have a small one. Otherwise, your mom is going to yell at me." "Mommy won't yell at you. Mommy secretly told me that you got better." Harrison knelt down and zipped up Leo's jacket. His eyes burned once again. He took Leo's small hand and walked out of the green room, navigating the bustling backstage corridors. As they passed a corner, he stopped. Through a half-open window, he looked out at the plaza. Eleanor was standing surrounded by reporters answering questions. Her crimson suit blazed like a fire in the sunlight. As she spoke, she gestured confidently. Her lips curved into a smile of absolute certainty. Harrison watched her for 2 seconds, then gently pulled the window shut. He held Leo's hand and continued toward the exit. They walked out of the side doors of the building. The warm afternoon sun washed over them. Leo looked up and asked, "Dad, are you going to leave again?" Harrison looked down at him. "I'm not going anywhere. I am staying right here to protect you and your mom." Pinky promise. Harrison held out his hand and hooked his pinky finger around Leo's. He shook it gently. Pinky promise for 100 years. Leo smiled, his eyes crinkling into half moons. He swung Harrison's hand happily as they skipped toward the ice cream shop across the street. Harrison glanced back at the towering glass skyscraper behind him. The windows of the top-floor executive suite reflected the sunlight. He thought he saw a flash of crimson standing by the glass. Looking down, he raised his hand and waved toward the window. The silhouette by the glass paused, then slowly, gently, raised a hand in return. Harrison turned back, tightening his grip on the small, soft hand holding his, and strode confidently forward into the bright autumn sunlight. Behind him in the plaza, the red ribbons from the ceremony still fluttered in the wind. Standing by the top-floor window, Eleanor watched the man and the little boy walk away until they disappeared from sight. She stood there for a very long time. Julian walked up behind her. "Do you not regret it? Well, see." She turned away and pulled the blinds shut. She took 2 steps, stopped, pulled out her phone, and sent a text to Harrison. "Tomorrow is the weekend. What time are you coming over?" Down on the street, Harrison's phone buzzed in his pocket. He kept one hand holding Leo's, pulled his phone out with the other, and looked at the screen. A slow, warm smile spread across his face. He typed back, 9 a.m. I'm taking Leo to get those artisan croissants from the bakery in Soho. Eleanor replied with a single word. "Okay." Harrison stared at that. "Okay," and laughed. He slid the phone back into his pocket, looked down at Leo, and said, "Tomorrow morning, Dad is taking you to get French croissants. Does that sound good?" Leo jumped with excitement. "Yes." The bell above the door of the ice cream shop jingled. Harrison pushed the door open, leading Leo inside. The heavy glass door swung shut behind him, locking out the cold autumn wind and sealing away the path he had once constantly looked back on. Ahead of him, a brand new life was just